Daniel Brooks never imagined that the worst moment of his life would begin with the cafe door chiming open on an ordinary Tuesday night. For 3 years, he'd lived next door to the woman he loved in silence, too afraid to knock on her door, too broken to believe he deserved her attention. Tonight, he'd finally agreed to a blind date, a desperate attempt to move on, to stop waiting for a miracle that would never come. But when Mia Carter walked through that door and saw him sitting across from another woman, the look of betrayal in her eyes shattered something fundamental inside him. In that frozen moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of evening conversation and the scent of coffee turning bitter, Daniel realized he'd made the catastrophic mistake of trying to forget the one person he should have been brave enough to pursue. If you've ever loved someone from a distance, if you've ever let fear steal your chance at happiness, stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The fluorescent lights of Meyer and Associates hummed their usual monotonous tune as Daniel Brooks saved his spreadsheet for the third time in as many minutes. It was 5:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the accounting department had already emptied out, leaving him alone with columns of numbers that had long since blurred into meaningless patterns. He should have left an hour ago, but the thought of returning to his silent apartment, of walking past Mia Carter's door and hearing the soft sounds of her life through the thin walls, filled him with a peculiar kind of dread that had become his constant companion. At 32, Daniel had perfected the art of being invisible. Average height, brown hair that he kept meticulously neat, wire-rimmed glasses that he cleaned compulsively. He was the kind of man people's eyes slid past in elevators, in grocery stores, in life. He'd learned early that invisibility was safer than visibility, that silence hurt less than rejection. His father had taught him that lesson with brutal efficiency during the 18 years they'd shared a roof, though Daniel rarely allowed himself to think about those days anymore. His phone buzzed, shattering his procrastination. Marcus Chen's name lit up the screen, and Daniel felt his stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. "You better not be backing out," Marcus said without preamble. "Laura's already at the cafe. She's been excited about this all week." Daniel's free hand found the edge of his desk, gripping it like a lifeline. "Marcus, I really don't think—" "No." Marcus's voice was firm but kind, the same tone he'd used when they'd met in a grief support group 5 years ago, both of them hollow-eyed and broken in different ways. "We've had this conversation 17 times, Daniel. I've counted. You can't spend the rest of your life hiding in spreadsheets and living like a ghost. Laura is wonderful, smart, compassionate, actually interested in meeting you. All you have to do is show up and be yourself." Be yourself. Daniel almost laughed at the absurdity of the advice. He'd spent 3 decades learning to make himself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. The self that Marcus wanted him to be felt like a foreign language he'd never quite learned to speak. "What if—" Daniel's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "What if I'm not what she's expecting? Then she's not the right person, and we move on." "But Daniel?" Marcus paused, and Daniel could picture his friend's expression, serious, concerned, refusing to let him hide. "You have to stop punishing yourself for existing. Whatever your father made you believe about yourself, it wasn't true. You deserve connection. You deserve happiness. You deserve to be seen." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through defenses Daniel had built so carefully over the years. He closed his eyes, and unbidden, an image rose in his mind. Mia Carter, stepping out of her apartment 3 mornings ago, her dark hair still damp from the shower, wearing scrubs decorated with tiny cartoon bears. She'd been running late, juggling her keys and a travel mug, and when she'd dropped her badge, Daniel had been there, picking it up before she could bend down. "Thank you," she'd said, her smile transforming her entire face. "You're always so thoughtful, Daniel. I don't know what I'd do without my guardian angel next door." Guardian angel. The words had sustained him for 3 days, replayed in his mind during every quiet moment. But they'd also reinforced what he already knew. Mia saw him as safe, helpful, invisible, never as someone she might actually want. "I'll go," Daniel heard himself say, the words escaping before his courage could fail. "But Marcus, if this goes badly, it won't. And even if it does, you'll survive. You're stronger than you think. Marcus's voice softened. "The cafe on Morrison Street, 7 o'clock. Laura will be wearing a blue scarf. And Daniel? Try to enjoy yourself, just for one night. Let yourself believe you're worthy of someone's attention." The call ended, leaving Daniel alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. He glanced at the clock, 6:02 p.m. 58 minutes to go home, shower, change, and convince himself he wasn't about to make a catastrophic mistake. The apartment building where Daniel had lived for 3 years was a modest 4-story structure in a neighborhood that real estate agents generously called transitional. The hallways smelled perpetually of cooking spices and industrial cleaner, and the elevator worked exactly half the time. Daniel didn't mind. The rent was manageable on his salary, the super was decent about repairs, and for the first 2 years and 9 months, it had simply been a place to sleep between work shifts. Then Mia Carter had moved into 3B, directly across from his 3A, and suddenly the hallway had become a stage where Daniel performed the same careful choreography every day, timing his departures to avoid awkward encounters, listening through the walls for signs of her schedule, leaving small anonymous kindnesses, a package brought inside from the hall, a broken light bulb in the shared corridor replaced. Her newspaper moved from the stairs to her doormat on rainy mornings. As he climbed the stairs now, the elevator was having one of its off days, Daniel heard voices above him. He slowed instinctively, recognizing Mia's laugh, warm and genuine. She was talking to Mrs. Patterson from 4A, their elderly neighbor, who treated everyone in the building like wayward grandchildren. "And I told him, if he can't respect my time, he doesn't deserve my attention," Mia was saying. "I'm 29 years old, Mrs. P. I'm done settling for men who think texting hey at midnight counts as effort." "Good for you, sweetheart," Mrs. Patterson replied. "You hold out for someone worthy, someone who sees what a treasure you are." Daniel pressed himself against the stairwell wall, hidden in the shadows, as the 2 women passed the landing above him. He caught a glimpse of Mia, dressed in civilian clothes now, jeans and a soft green sweater that made her eyes look impossibly bright. She was carrying grocery bags, and even from a distance, he could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. 12-hour shifts at the pediatric ward, he knew. She'd mentioned it once, months ago, in one of their brief hallway conversations. "What about you?" Mrs. Patterson asked as their voices grew fainter. "Anyone special catching your eye?" Mia's laugh was quieter now, almost wistful. "Maybe. There's someone who... But it's complicated. I don't even know if he sees me that way." Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs, hope and despair warring in his chest. He waited until he heard Mia's door close before continuing up the stairs, his mind churning. Someone. There was someone she was interested in. Of course there was. Someone confident, probably. Someone who knew how to make her laugh without rehearsing conversations in his head for 3 days first. Someone who wasn't him. His apartment greeted him with its usual silence. 1 bedroom, barely furnished, everything neutral and temporary. He'd never bothered to make it feel like home because home had always felt like a dangerous concept, a trap that could be weaponized. His father had taught him that too, that spaces like people were just waiting for opportunities to hurt you. Daniel showered mechanically, standing under water that never got quite hot enough, trying to wash away the anxiety that clung to his skin like a second layer. He dressed carefully, dark jeans, a button-down shirt in deep blue that Marcus had insisted made him look approachable. As he studied himself in the bathroom mirror, Daniel saw what he always saw, a man trying very hard to appear normal, to hide the fundamental wrongness he'd always felt lived at his core. At 6:45, he forced himself out the door. As he locked it, Mia's door opened. She stood in her doorway, holding a bag of trash, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. She'd changed into comfortable clothes, leggings and an oversized sweatshirt that read, "Kindness is magic," in fading letters. Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. Daniel thought she'd never looked more beautiful. "Hey, neighbor," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "Heading somewhere nice? You look really put together." Daniel felt heat creep up his neck. "Just meeting someone. For coffee." Something flickered across Mia's face, too quick for him to identify. A date? The word hung between them, weighted with implications Daniel didn't dare examine. Sort of. A friend set it up. Friend. Blind date thing. He attempted a laugh that came out slightly strangled. Probably a terrible idea.
I'm sure it'll be great, Mia said, but her smile had dimmed slightly. You're a catch, Daniel. Any woman would be lucky to spend time with you. The words should have warmed him. Instead, they reinforced everything he already knew. She saw him as nice, as safe, as someone else's potential happiness. Never her own. Thanks, he managed. I should probably... Right, yes, go. Don't want to be late. She stepped back into her doorway, still holding the trash bag. Good luck, Daniel. I hope she's worthy of you. As he walked down the hallway, Daniel heard her door close softly behind him. He didn't let himself look back. Morrison Street Cafe occupied a corner storefront that had cycled through half a dozen identities before finally settling into its current incarnation as a neighborhood gathering spot.
Warm lighting spilled through large windows, and inside, mismatched furniture created an atmosphere of comfortable bohemian chaos. Daniel had passed it hundreds of times, but had never gone inside. It seemed like the kind of place for people who belonged to communities, who had friends to meet and stories to share. He spotted Laura Bennett immediately. She sat at a small table near the window, wearing the promised blue scarf, her attention focused on a book. As he approached, Daniel cataloged details with the same analytical precision he brought to spreadsheets. Late 20s, dark skin, natural hair styled in elegant twists, an easy grace in the way she sat. She looked up as his shadow fell across her table, and her smile was open and welcoming. Daniel? She asked, closing her book. He caught a glimpse of the title, something about restorative justice. I'm Laura. It's so nice to meet you. Her handshake was firm, confident. Daniel felt his own hand trembling slightly and hoped she wouldn't notice. Thank you for agreeing to this, he said, settling into the chair across from her. I should warn you, I'm not... Marcus might have oversold my social skills. Laura laughed, a rich sound that seemed to fill the space between them. Marcus told me you were kind, thoughtful, and terrible at accepting compliments. So far he's batting 3 for 3. A waitress appeared, young and efficient, and they ordered coffee for him, tea for her, a shared plate of pastries that Laura insisted on because first dates should involve sugar. It's scientifically proven to reduce anxiety. The small gesture of consideration eased something tight in Daniel's chest. As they waited for their order, Laura leaned forward slightly, her expression genuinely interested. So Marcus said you work in accounting. Do you enjoy it? It was a simple question, the kind asked on every first date, but something in her tone suggested she actually wanted to know the answer. Daniel found himself responding with more honesty than he'd intended. I'm good at it, he said carefully. Numbers make sense, they follow rules, they don't... He caught himself, aware he was revealing too much. It's stable, predictable. But do you enjoy it? Laura pressed gently. No one had ever asked him that before. Daniel turned the question over in his mind, examining it from different angles. I don't know if I've ever let myself think about enjoyment. I've always just focused on getting through, being competent, not making mistakes. Laura nodded slowly, and something in her expression suggested she understood more than he'd said. I work in social services, she offered. Family advocacy, mostly. I spend my days fighting systems that are designed to crush people who are already vulnerable. It's exhausting and heartbreaking, and most days I love it because even small victories matter. That sounds important, Daniel said, meaning it. Necessary. So does being the person who keeps financial systems running honestly, Laura replied. We all contribute differently. But Daniel? She waited until he met her eyes. You're allowed to want more than just competence. You're allowed to want joy. Their drinks arrived, providing a welcome break from the intensity of the conversation. As they added sugar and cream, settling into easier topics, favorite books, bad movies they secretly loved, the peculiar characters who populated their respective workplaces, Daniel felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not attraction exactly, though Laura was undeniably lovely. Something more like possibility. The faint suggestion that maybe Marcus had been right, that maybe he could have this, could be the kind of person who sat in cafes and had normal conversations about normal things. Can I ask you something personal? Laura said after they'd been talking for nearly 30 minutes. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. Daniel tensed reflexively but nodded. Marcus mentioned you've been single for a while, that you have trouble letting people in. She spoke carefully, without judgment. Is that about not finding the right person, or about not believing you deserve to be found? The question cut too close to truths Daniel spent most of his energy avoiding. He stared into his coffee, watching the light play across its dark surface. Both, maybe. I grew up in a house where I learned that wanting things was dangerous, that showing vulnerability was weakness. My father had very specific ideas about what I should be, and I failed at all of them. He paused, surprised by his own candor. I spent 18 years being told I wasn't enough. It's hard to unlearn that. Laura reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. I work with kids who've lived through trauma, she said softly. Kids who've learned that the world is cruel and people are unpredictable. You know what I see in them? Incredible strength, resilience, the courage it takes to keep showing up every day when everything you've learned tells you to hide. Her voice was firm now, insistent. Whatever your father taught you about yourself was wrong, Daniel. You're not broken. You're not insufficient. You're someone who survived something hard and came out the other side still capable of kindness. Daniel felt something crack inside him, a fault line he'd spent years reinforcing suddenly giving way. How can you know that? You just met me. I know because you're here, Laura said simply. Because you let Marcus push you into this even though it terrified you. Because when I asked difficult questions, you answered honestly instead of performing. Because the cafe door chimed. It was a small sound barely audible over the murmur of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine. But Daniel heard it with perfect clarity, felt it like a shift in atmospheric pressure. He looked up automatically, some instinct drawing his attention toward the entrance. Mia Carter stood frozen in the doorway. She wore the same outfit from their hallway encounter, leggings, oversized sweatshirt, her hair still in its messy bun. She'd clearly just run out for something quick, probably to the corner store 2 doors down. Her eyes scanned the cafe casually at first, then locked onto Daniel's table. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching into impossible elasticity. Daniel watched as recognition bloomed across Mia's face, followed immediately by something else. Shock, hurt, confusion, all chasing each other across her features too quickly to fully separate. Her gaze moved from him to Laura, taking in the intimate positioning of their table, the shared pastries, the clear context of the scene. She'd known he had a date. He'd told her himself less than an hour ago. But knowing and seeing, Daniel realized with dawning horror, were devastatingly different things. Daniel? Laura's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you okay? He couldn't answer, couldn't look away from Mia, who stood motionless in the doorway as other customers edged around her with annoyed expressions. Her hand gripped her purse strap with white-knuckled intensity, and Daniel could see her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. Then, with visible effort, Mia squared her shoulders and started walking toward them. Every step she took seemed to echo through Daniel's consciousness. He was dimly aware of Laura turning to see what had captured his attention, of her sharp intake of breath as she observed Mia's approach, of the shifting energy in the space around their table. But mostly he was aware of Mia's eyes, fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel simultaneously exposed and utterly seen. She stopped at their table. Up close, Daniel could see that her eyes were slightly red, as if she'd been crying recently or fighting tears. Her jaw was set with determination, but her hands trembled slightly as they clutched her purse. Mia, Daniel managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't... Hi. She cut him off, but her tone wasn't angry. It was something worse, wounded, vulnerable, stripped of all pretense. She glanced briefly at Laura. I'm sorry to interrupt, She turned her attention back to Daniel, and the raw emotion in her gaze nearly stopped his heart. I need to ask you something, right now, before I lose my courage. Laura had gone very still, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding. She looked between them, reading the situation with the practiced skill of someone who spent her days navigating complex emotional dynamics. Daniel's mouth had gone completely dry. Okay. Mia took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the suddenly quiet cafe. Other patrons had stopped their conversations, sensing the drama unfolding. Why didn't you ask me out instead? 5 words. 5 simple words that detonated like a bomb in the center of Daniel's carefully constructed world. He stared at her, unable to process what he'd just heard. The question hung in the air between them, impossible and devastating and more real than anything he'd experienced in years. His mind raced through 3 years of hallway encounters, of small kindnesses exchanged, of conversations that never quite said what he wanted them to say, of watching her leave for work and waiting hours for her to come home safely, of learning her schedule, her preferences, the way she took her coffee, the shows that made her laugh through the shared wall between their apartments. He tried to form words, but his throat had closed around them. Mia, I didn't think what? Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't look away. Didn't think I'd noticed you? Didn't think I'd want you to? She laughed, a sound caught between humor and pain. Daniel, I've been waiting for you to knock on my door for 2 years. 2 years of hoping you'd see me as more than just your neighbor, more than someone to help with packages and broken light bulbs. The cafe had gone completely silent now. Daniel was aware of Laura watching them, of the barista pausing mid-pour, of a dozen strangers bearing witness to the complete unraveling of his assumptions about his own life. You waited? He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't reconcile the Mia in his imagination, the one who saw him as safe, invisible, merely kind, with this woman standing before him, vulnerable and open and claiming she'd wanted him all along. I thought you weren't interested, Mia continued, and tears were spilling down her cheeks now, though her voice remained steady. You were always so careful, so distant. You'd help me, but you never asked for anything, never suggested coffee or a movie, or just spending time together beyond those 3-minute hallway conversations. So I told myself you just saw me as a neighbor, as someone to be polite to. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. But then tonight, when you said you had a date, I realized I couldn't keep waiting. I couldn't wonder what if for the rest of my life. Daniel felt like he was drowning, like every breath required conscious effort. 3 years. She'd been interested for 2 of them. All those careful dances in the hallway, all those moments he'd convinced himself meant nothing. She'd been waiting, for him, for a courage he'd never found. I didn't know, he said helplessly. Mia, I never thought someone like you could want someone like me. Someone like you? Mia's voice rose slightly, frustration breaking through the hurt. Daniel, you're the kindest person I've ever known. You notice things, not just about me, about everyone. Mrs. Patterson's groceries that you carry up the stairs when she's tired, the kid in 2C whose bike you fixed without being asked, the way you always make sure everyone in the building gets their packages before you go to work. She was crying openly now, past the point of trying to hide it. You think I don't see you, but I do. I see you every day. And I've been falling in love with who you are, wondering why you couldn't see it too. The world had narrowed to just the 2 of them. Mia standing there, heart exposed, and Daniel sitting paralyzed in his chair, everything he'd believed about himself and his place in the world crumbling like sand. He became aware of Laura moving beside him. She stood gracefully, gathering her book and scarf with quiet efficiency. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. Daniel. She waited until he could tear his gaze from Mia to look at her. This is what I was talking about. Joy, possibility, the thing you're allowed to want. She smiled, sad but genuine. I'm gonna go, not because I'm angry, I'm not, but because I'm not the right person in this story, and that's okay. She touched his shoulder briefly. Be brave. For once in your life, choose the thing you actually want instead of the thing you think you deserve. She moved past Mia, pausing just long enough to say something too quiet for Daniel to hear. Mia nodded, and then Laura was gone, the cafe door chiming her exit. Silence stretched between them. Around them, the cafe was beginning to return to its normal rhythm, conversations resuming in hushed tones, though Daniel could feel eyes still watching them with undisguised curiosity. Daniel! Mia's voice was quieter now, exhausted from emotion. Please say something, even if it's that I've made a horrible mistake, even if it's that you don't feel the same way. Just don't sit there silent while my heart breaks. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor too loudly. His legs felt unsteady, but he forced himself to move around the table until he stood directly in front of her. This close, he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes, could smell the familiar lavender of her shampoo, could count the tears still clinging to her eyelashes. "I've loved you since the day you moved in," he said, and the words emerged raw and unpolished, nothing like the speeches he'd rehearsed 1,000 times in his mind. "When you were struggling with that bookshelf you'd bought, trying to carry it up the stairs by yourself, and you were laughing about how you always bit off more than you could chew. You looked at me when I offered to help, and you smiled, and I thought I'd never seen anything more beautiful in my entire life." Mia's hand came up to cover her mouth, fresh tears spilling over. "But I didn't think I could be what you needed," Daniel continued, the dam finally breaking, years of silence pouring out. "I'm not brave or confident or interesting. I'm just the quiet guy across the hall who replaces light bulbs and brings in packages. I didn't think that could ever be enough. So I told myself it was better to have you as a neighbor than to risk losing even that by asking for more." "You're an idiot," Mia said, but she was smiling through her tears. "A beautiful, kind, incredible idiot." "Probably," Daniel agreed. "Mia, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be the person you seem to think I am. I'm going to mess this up 100 different ways." "Then mess it up," she said fiercely. "Mess it up with me. Let me see your mistakes and your fears and all the things you think make you unworthy. Because, Daniel, I've been watching you for 2 years. I know you're scared. I know you keep people at a distance. I know you use kindness as a way to contribute without risking yourself." She took his hands in hers, and the touch sent electricity through his entire nervous system. "But I also know that beneath all that fear is someone who deserves to be loved exactly as he is. And I want to be the one who loves you, if you'll let me." Daniel looked down at their joined hands, at the physical proof that this moment was real, that he wasn't dreaming or imagining the impossible thing being offered to him. Every instinct he'd developed over 3 decades screamed at him to retreat, to protect himself, to not trust something that seemed too good to be true. But Laura's words echoed in his mind. "Be brave. Choose the thing you actually want." "I want to try," he whispered. "I'm terrified, but I want to try. With you." Mia's smile transformed her entire face, bright enough to chase away shadows he'd carried for years. That's all I needed to hear. She was standing close enough now that Daniel could feel the warmth of her, could see the rapid pulse at the base of her throat. He was aware that they were still standing in the middle of a cafe, that people were watching, that this moment would become a story told and retold. But for once in his life, he didn't care about being invisible. "Can we—" He struggled to find the right words. "Can we go somewhere else? Somewhere we can talk without an audience?" Mia nodded, but she didn't immediately pull away. Instead, she leaned forward, rising slightly on her toes, and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. It was brief, chaste, but it sent a shockwave through Daniel's entire body. "Let's go home," she said softly. "We've been neighbors long enough. Maybe it's time to actually get to know each other." They left the cafe together, stepping out into the cool evening air. The street was quiet, streetlights casting pools of yellow light along the sidewalk. As they walked, Mia's hand found his, their fingers interlacing with a naturalness that suggested they'd done this 1,000 times before, instead of for the first time. "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" Mia said as they turned toward their building. "After what just happened, I don't think embarrassment exists anymore," Daniel replied, earning a laugh. "Fair point." She squeezed his hand. "Remember about 6 months ago, when I asked if you wanted to watch a movie with me? You said you had work to catch up on?" Daniel winced. He remembered. He'd spent 3 hours sitting in his dark apartment, listening to the sounds of her watching the movie alone through the wall, hating himself for being too afraid to say yes. "I didn't actually have work," he admitted. I didn't trust myself not to say something stupid, to make you uncomfortable." "I know," Mia said gently. "Your lights were off. I could see under your door. I sat there hoping you'd change your mind, that you'd knock and say you'd finished earlier than expected." She looked up at him. "I've been doing that a lot. Hoping, waiting, convincing myself I was imagining the way you looked at me sometimes."
I thought I was being careful, Daniel said. I didn't realize I was being obvious. You were being both.
They'd reached their building now, climbing the familiar stairs together. Mrs. Patterson figured it out months ago. She asked me once why two people who so clearly cared about each other kept pretending they didn't. What did you tell her? That I was waiting for you to be ready, that I thought maybe you needed to come to me in your own time. They'd reached the third-floor landing, standing between their two doors, 3A and 3B, separated by 3 feet of hallway that had somehow contained years of unspoken longing. Was I wrong to wait? Daniel thought about Laura's words, about choosing what he wanted instead of what he thought he deserved. He thought about Marcus pushing him toward a blind date because everyone could see he was drowning in his own isolation. He thought about all the times he'd stood in this exact spot, key in hand, listening to Mia moving around her apartment and wondering what it would be like to knock on her door for no reason except wanting to see her. "No," he said finally. "You weren't wrong. I needed to hit rock bottom, I think. I needed to try to move on, to prove to myself that I could live without hoping for something I didn't believe I could have. And then I needed you to be braver than me, to walk into that cafe and ask the question I was too afraid to ask." "So we're both a mess," Mia said, but she was smiling. "Good. I don't trust people who have everything figured out." They stood in the hallway, the same space where they'd exchanged hundreds of brief, careful conversations over the years. But everything felt different now. The air between them hummed with possibility, with the electric awareness of two people who had finally stopped pretending they didn't want each other. "Do you want to come in?" Mia asked, gesturing to her door. "We could talk, really talk, about everything we've been too scared to say." Daniel nodded, his heart hammering. As Mia unlocked her door, he caught a glimpse of Mrs. Patterson peering out from the floor above, a knowing smile on her elderly face. She gave him a thumbs up before disappearing back into her apartment. Mia's apartment was a revelation. Where Daniel's was sparse and carefully neutral, hers burst with personality. Books overflowed from shelves, plants crowded the windowsills, and colorful throw pillows transformed her couch into an invitation to settle in and stay. Photographs covered one wall, her family, he presumed, and friends, and candid shots of moments that mattered. It was messy and warm and alive. Everything his apartment wasn't. "Sorry about the chaos," Mia said, moving to clear space on the couch. "I wasn't expecting company." "It's perfect," Daniel said honestly. "It looks like someone actually lives here." She gestured for him to sit, then settled beside him, close enough that their knees touched. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, absorbing the reality of this new configuration, this shift from neighbors to whatever they were becoming. "I don't know how to do this," Daniel said finally. "How to be open, vulnerable, all the things that seem to come naturally to everyone else." "They don't come naturally," Mia said softly. "People just get better at faking it. Or they find someone they trust enough to stop faking." She reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind his ear in a gesture so tender it made his chest ache. "Tell me about your father." The request should have sent him running. Instead, Daniel found himself sinking deeper into her couch, into the safety of her presence, and for the first time in his life, he let someone see the wounds he'd spent decades hiding. He told her about growing up in a house where love came with conditions he could never meet, where every mistake was evidence of fundamental unworthiness, where silence became survival. He told her about leaving at 18 with nothing but a scholarship and a determination to disappear into normalcy. He told her about the therapy he'd tried and abandoned, the self-help books he'd read without absorbing, the years of going through motions while feeling fundamentally disconnected from his own life. Mia listened without interruption, her hand finding his halfway through, holding on like an anchor. When he finally ran out of words, she didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. She just pulled him closer until his head rested against her shoulder, and she held him while something hard and ancient inside him began, very slowly, to soften. "Thank you," she whispered against his hair, "for trusting me with that." "Your turn," Daniel said, his voice muffled against her sweater. "Tell me something true." So she did. She told him about moving to the city alone after a bad breakup, about taking the apartment across from his because it was all she could afford, and feeling like a failure for starting over at 27. She told him about the pediatric ward where she worked, about holding the hands of sick children and their terrified parents, about going home some nights and crying in the shower because there was only so much heartbreak one person could hold. She told him about noticing him that first day with the bookshelf, about thinking he had kind eyes, about slowly realizing that the quiet man across the hall saw her in ways other people didn't. "You started bringing my newspaper up on rainy mornings," she said. "Do you remember when that started?" Daniel thought back. "Last spring. You'd mentioned in passing that you hated when it got wet. I didn't think you'd notice." "I noticed everything," Mia said. "Every little kindness. Every time you'd hold the door extra long when you heard me coming. The way you'd time your trash runs to coincide with mine so I wouldn't have to go down to the bins alone at night. The broken light in the hallway that you fixed even though you could have just called the super." She shifted so she could look at him directly. "Daniel, you've been taking care of me for years. You just never let me take care of you back." "I didn't know how to ask," he admitted. "You don't have to ask anymore," Mia said. "I'm here. I'm choosing to be here, with full knowledge of who you are and what you're carrying. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have everything figured out. You just have to let me in." Daniel looked at her, really looked, without the filter of fear and self-doubt that had clouded his vision for so long. He saw the woman who'd been brave enough to walk into a cafe and risk humiliation for the chance at something real. He saw the nurse who held broken children and their terrified parents. He saw the neighbor who'd waited 2 years for him to find his courage. He saw someone who, impossibly, wanted him exactly as he was. "I'm going to mess this up," he said again, needing her to understand. "Probably," she agreed, "and I'll mess it up too. We'll hurt each other accidentally. We'll have to learn each other's triggers and boundaries. There will be nights when you need space and I need closeness, or vice versa. It's going to be hard and messy and nothing like a movie." She smiled. "But Daniel, we've been circling each other for years. We've already done hard. Maybe it's time to try something different." "Like what?" "Like honest," Mia said simply. "Like choosing each other every day, even when it's difficult. Like building something together instead of just surviving alone." Outside, the city carried on its usual rhythms: traffic sounds, distant sirens, the murmur of neighbors in nearby apartments. Inside, in Mia's lived-in, colorful, welcoming space, Daniel felt something shift fundamentally. The careful walls he'd built around himself didn't crumble. That would come later, slowly, with time and trust. But they became permeable, allowing in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to spend the rest of his life hiding. "Stay," Mia said softly. "Not for anything. Not for expectations or pressure. Just stay. Let's order pizza and watch something stupid and talk until we can't keep our eyes open. Let's start learning how to be together instead of just adjacent." Daniel thought about his empty apartment across the hall, about all the nights he'd spent there alone, listening to the sounds of Mia's life through the wall and wishing he was brave enough to be part of it. He thought about Laura walking away with Grace, giving him permission to choose joy. He thought about Marcus's voice on the phone, insisting he deserved connection. He thought about Mrs. Patterson's knowing smile and Mia's tears in the cafe and the electric feeling of her hand in his as they walked home. "Okay," he said, and the word felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I'll stay." Mia's smile could have lit the entire city. She pulled out her phone, pulling up a pizza delivery app, and they spent 15 minutes debating toppings with the kind of easy comfort that suggested they'd been doing this for years. When they finally ordered, half pepperoni for him, half vegetarian for her, Mia settled back against the couch and pulled Daniel with her, arranging them so his head rested against her shoulder again. "This is nice," she murmured, her fingers playing absently with his hair. "I've imagined this so many times. It's better than I thought it would be." "Even with me being terrified?" Daniel asked. "Especially with you being terrified," Mia said. "It means you're really here, really trying. That matters more than anything else." They talked while they waited for the pizza, about small things and large, about dreams and fears and all the ordinary details that make up a life. Daniel learned that Mia sang in the shower, badly and enthusiastically, that she'd wanted to be a writer before practical concerns had steered her toward nursing, that her favorite movie was a romantic comedy she'd watched so many times she could recite every line, that she hated mornings but loved the quiet hours just before dawn when the city was still sleeping. Mia learned that Daniel played piano, though he hadn't touched one in years, that he read voraciously but only in secret, as if his father's disdain for useless pursuits still echoed in his mind, that he'd never traveled anywhere, never allowed himself to want experiences that seemed frivolous, that he'd been planning for years to tell her how he felt, but had convinced himself the timing was never right. "What changed?" she asked. "Why did you agree to the blind date tonight?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, examining his motivations with the honesty she deserved. "I think I finally accepted that you'd never see me the way I saw you. I thought, if I could just force myself to move on, to give someone else a chance, maybe eventually I'd stop hoping for something impossible." "And instead you walked through that door," Daniel said, "and everything impossible became real." The pizza arrived, and they ate sitting on her floor, backs against the couch, knees touching. Mia put on a movie, something light and forgettable, but neither of them really watched it. They were too busy learning the architecture of each other's faces, the cadence of each other's laughter, the thousand small things that couldn't be known from across a hallway. As the night deepened, Daniel felt the weight of the day settling into his bones. The anxiety of the blind date, the shock of Mia's appearance, the emotional exhaustion of finally letting someone see him. He must have started to drift because he felt Mia shift, standing and pulling him to his feet. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get you home. You're about to fall asleep on my floor, and while I find that endearing, I think you'll be more comfortable in your own bed." Daniel wanted to protest, to stay in this warm, safe space where he didn't have to be alone with his thoughts. But Mia was right. He could barely keep his eyes open, and tomorrow was still a work day, still required him to function in the regular world. They walked to her door together, and Daniel paused at the threshold. His apartment was exactly 3 feet away across the hallway, but it felt like a vast distance, a return to isolation he'd grown too accustomed to. "Hey," Mia said, reading his hesitation with the same intuition she'd shown all night. "This isn't goodbye, this is just good night. Tomorrow you'll go to work, and I'll work my shift, and when we get home we'll see each other in this hallway, and maybe you'll be brave enough to knock on my door instead of just walking past. And maybe we'll have dinner together, and maybe, slowly, we'll figure out what this is and what it can become." "What if I lose my courage again?" Daniel asked quietly. "Then I'll come knock on your door," Mia said firmly. "I'm done waiting for you to come to me, Daniel. We're doing this together now, which means we both get to be brave, and we both get to be scared, and we both get to lean on each other when it's hard." She kissed him then, just a gentle press of her lips to his, brief but full of promise. When she pulled back, Daniel stood stunned, his entire world having shifted on its axis once again. "Good night, Daniel Brooks," she whispered. "Thank you for being brave tonight. Thank you for letting me be brave too." "Good night, Mia," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. He crossed the 3 feet to his own door, unlocking it with hands that still trembled slightly. Before he went inside, he looked back. Mia was still standing in her doorway, watching him with a smile that suggested she could see directly into his soul and loved what she found there. Inside his apartment, the silence felt different than it usually did. Not oppressive, but temporary, a pause rather than a permanent state. Daniel moved through his evening routine mechanically, but his mind was full of Mia's voice, Mia's smile, the feeling of her hand in his and her lips against his cheek. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of Mia moving around her apartment through the wall they shared. But tonight, instead of painful longing, he felt anticipation. Tomorrow, he would see her in the hallway. Maybe she'd smile at him with new knowledge between them. Maybe he'd find the courage to ask if she wanted coffee. Maybe, slowly, the 3 feet of hallway that had separated them for so long would become a bridge instead of a barrier. His phone buzzed with a text. "Marcus. How did it go?" "Laura texted me. Said something interesting happened. You okay?" Daniel stared at the message, trying to figure out how to compress the evening's transformation into a response. Finally, he typed, "I think my life just changed completely. Call you tomorrow? The response was immediate. Holy shit. Yes. So proud of you, brother. Daniel set his phone aside, and just before sleep claimed him, he heard it. A gentle knock on the wall from Mia's side. 3 soft taps. Without thinking, he knocked back. 3 answering taps. Through the wall, he heard her laugh, bright and delighted, and he fell asleep smiling, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Morning light filtered through Daniel's blinds with an insistence that felt almost aggressive. He'd slept fitfully, his dreams a confused tangle of cafe scenes and hallway conversations, of Mia's tears and her smile, and the impossible reality that she'd been waiting for him all along. When his alarm finally pulled him fully into consciousness, his first thought was that he'd imagined the entire evening, that in the cold light of day, he'd discover it had all been some elaborate fantasy his lonely mind had constructed. Then he heard movement through the wall. Mia, getting ready for her shift. The sounds were familiar, her footsteps crossing the apartment, the rush of water in her shower, the muffled thump of drawers opening and closing. But this morning, those sounds carried different weight. This morning, he knew she was thinking about him too. Daniel forced himself out of bed, moving through his morning routine with mechanical precision, while his mind raced ahead to the moment when he'd step into the hallway and see her. Would things feel different in daylight? Would the vulnerability they'd shared the night before seem like a mistake now, something best forgotten and never mentioned again? The familiar anxiety crept back, whispering its usual poison, that he'd misunderstood everything, that Mia would wake up and realize she'd made a terrible error in judgment. He was buttoning his shirt when he heard her door open. His hands stilled, every nerve suddenly alert. Her footsteps moved toward the stairs, then paused, stopped completely. The silence stretched, and Daniel could picture her standing there, hand on the railing, looking back at his closed door. 3 soft knocks sounded against his door. His heart stuttered. Daniel? Mia's voice, slightly muffled but warm. I know you're awake. I can hear you moving around. He crossed to the door, hand hesitating on the knob. This was it, the first test of whether last night's courage would survive the morning. He opened the door. Mia stood in the hallway wearing her scrubs, the ones with tiny cartoon bears, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her work bag slung over one shoulder. She looked tired, as if she'd slept as poorly as he had, but when she saw him, her entire face transformed with a smile so genuine it made his chest ache. Hi, she said softly. Hi, Daniel managed. They stood there, 3 feet of hallway between them, and suddenly he was aware of how absurd it was, that they could spend half the night talking in her apartment, but now, in the mundane light of morning, he didn't know what to say. Mia seemed to read his paralysis. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and before Daniel could overthink it, she rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, the same spot she'd kissed last night, as if marking it as hers. I didn't dream it, she said, her breath warm against his skin. Last night, it was real. I thought maybe I had, Daniel admitted. Dreamed it, I mean. No. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. It was real. You're real. This is real. And I'm going to be late for my shift if I don't leave right now. But I needed you to know. I woke up thinking about you. I woke up happy. The words settled into Daniel's chest, warm and weighty. Me too, he said, and it was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever admitted. Mia, Tonight, she interrupted gently. Come over tonight, when we're both home from work. We'll have dinner and we'll talk more, and we'll keep figuring this out. She checked her watch, winced. I really have to go. But Daniel, don't overthink this today. Don't talk yourself out of what's happening between us. Okay? He nodded, not trusting his voice. Promise me, she insisted. I promise, he said, though they both knew it was a promise he'd struggled to keep. Mia squeezed his hand once, quickly, then hurried toward the stairs. At the landing, she turned back. Oh, and Daniel? Wear something comfortable tonight. I'm thinking we order Chinese food and you finally tell me about that piano playing you mentioned. Then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the stairwell, and Daniel stood alone in the hallway feeling like the entire world had tilted on its axis. The office felt surreal. Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the same spreadsheet he'd been pretending to review for the past hour, unable to concentrate on anything beyond the memory of Mia's kiss on his cheek and the promise of tonight hanging in his immediate future. Around him, the accounting department hummed with its usual energy, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the low murmur of professional conversation. But it all seemed to happen at a distance, as if he were watching his life through thick glass. "You look different." Daniel jerked his attention away from his monitor to find Sarah Chen, one of his colleagues, studying him with open curiosity. Sarah had worked in the cubicle next to his for 2 years, and in that entire time, they'd exchanged perhaps a dozen conversations beyond basic professional courtesy. She was sharp, efficient, and generally kept to herself, qualities Daniel had always appreciated because they meant she didn't pry. Apparently that was changing. "I look the same," Daniel said, though he could feel heat creeping up his neck. "No, you don't." Sarah leaned against his cubicle wall, arms crossed, a small smile playing at her lips. "You look, I don't know, less like you're waiting for the floor to swallow you whole. Did something happen?" Before Daniel could deflect, Marcus appeared behind Sarah, his expression a mixture of concern and barely contained excitement. "Daniel, conference room, now." Sarah raised her eyebrows but stepped aside. Marcus didn't wait for a response, just turned and headed toward the small glass-walled room the team used for private discussions. Daniel followed, aware of Sarah's eyes tracking him with renewed interest. Marcus closed the door behind them and immediately grabbed Daniel's shoulders. "Tell me everything." Laura's text was cryptic as hell. She said you had a significant revelation and that she was happy for you, but she wouldn't give me details. What happened after you got to the cafe? Daniel sank into one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted by the weight of explaining what he didn't fully understand himself. "My neighbor showed up." Marcus waited. When Daniel didn't continue, he prompted, "And?" "And she asked why I didn't ask her out instead of going on a blind date." The words came out flat, still surreal in Daniel's mouth. "She told me she's been waiting for me to notice her for 2 years. She said..." He had to pause, the memory almost too overwhelming. "She said she's been falling in love with me." Marcus dropped into the chair across from him, eyes wide. "The neighbor? The one you've been pining over since forever? That neighbor?" "Mia. Her name is Mia." "Holy shit!" Marcus ran his hands through his hair, laughing in disbelief. "Okay, back up. Start from the beginning. What happened with Laura?" Daniel recounted the evening. Laura's kindness, their conversation about deserving joy, the moment Mia walked through the door. He tried to capture the way time had seemed to slow down, the way his entire understanding of the past 3 years had inverted in a single moment. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression cycling through surprise, delight, and something that looked almost like pride. "And Laura just left?" Marcus asked when Daniel finished. "She said I needed to choose what I actually wanted instead of what I thought I deserved," Daniel said quietly. "She gave me permission to stop punishing myself." "I like her even more now," Marcus said. That's incredibly gracious." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "So what happens now? Did you talk to Mia? Are you together? Are you freaking out?" "Yes to all 3, Daniel admitted. "We talked for hours. She came to my apartment. Well, I went to hers. We're having dinner again tonight, and I'm absolutely freaking out because, Marcus, what if I'm not ready for this? What if I mess it up so badly that I lose her completely?" "Then you'll mess it up, and you'll apologize, and you'll try to do better," Marcus said firmly. "Daniel, listen to me. This woman waited 2 years for you to notice her. She walked into a cafe and basically declared her feelings in front of strangers. She's not going to bail at the first sign of difficulty." He paused, his voice gentling. "But you have to let her in. Really let her in. Not the carefully edited version of yourself you show the world. The real you. The scared, wounded, beautiful mess that you actually are." "I don't know how to do that," Daniel said helplessly. "Yes, you do. You're doing it right now, with me. You've been doing it in that grief group for 5 years. Marcus stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. "I remember when you first showed up. You sat in the back, didn't speak for 3 months. Looked like you wanted the earth to open up and swallow you. But eventually, you started talking. Started letting us see you. It was terrifying for you, I know it was, but you did it anyway.
Daniel thought about those early meetings, about the months of sitting in silence while others shared their losses and fears. He'd only started speaking after Marcus had cornered him one night, gently but firmly, insisting that witnessing other people's pain without offering his own wasn't connection. It was just another form of hiding. "This is different," Daniel said. This matters more." "Which is exactly why you have to be brave," Marcus replied. "Look, I'm not saying it'll be easy. You've got years of trauma telling you that vulnerability leads to pain. Your father did a number on you that you're still unpacking. But Daniel, Mia isn't your father. She's someone who sees you, really sees you, and wants you anyway. That's not something you walk away from just because it's scary." "What if she realizes I'm not worth the effort?" Marcus turned from the window, his expression suddenly fierce. "Stop. Right now, stop. That voice in your head that says you're not worth it? That's your father talking. That's not truth. You are worth effort. You're worth patience. You're worth love. And until you start believing that, you're going to sabotage every good thing that tries to come into your life." The words hit like a physical blow. Daniel felt something crack inside him, not breaking, but shifting, like a bone that had healed wrong and needed to be reset. He'd spent so many years accepting his father's assessment of his worth as objective fact that he'd forgotten it was just one person's damaged perspective. "I don't know how to believe that," he whispered. "Then let Mia believe it for you," Marcus said, "until you can believe it yourself." That's what love is, Daniel. It's letting someone see you clearly and choosing to stay anyway. It's borrowing someone else's faith in you when your own runs out. A knock on the conference room door interrupted them. Sarah stood outside, looking apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, but Daniel, you've got a call on line 3. Says it's urgent." Daniel's stomach dropped. Urgent calls were never good news. He picked up the conference room phone, punching the blinking line. "Daniel Brooks speaking." "Mr. Brooks, this is Karen Winters from Maplewood Senior Living. I'm calling about your father." The world seemed to tilt. Daniel hadn't spoken to his father in 14 years, not since he'd left for college and never looked back. He'd always known this call would come eventually, but he'd assumed he'd feel something. Instead, there was just numbness. "What happened?" His voice sounded strange in his own ears, distant and clinical. "Your father had a stroke last night. He's stable now, but the doctors say the next 48 hours are critical. You're listed as his emergency contact. I know you two haven't been in communication, but I thought you should know." Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. Across the table, Marcus was watching him with concern. "Where is he?" She gave him the name of a hospital 3 hours away, the town where Daniel had grown up and sworn never to return. When he hung up, Marcus was already standing. "What do you need?" Marcus asked simply. "I don't know." Daniel felt disconnected from his body, as if he were floating somewhere above the conference room, watching himself receive news that should matter more than it did. "My father had a stroke. They say I should come. Do you want to go?" "Did he?" Daniel examined his feelings with the same analytical precision he brought to balance sheets. Grief? No. Relief? Uncomfortably close. Obligation? Yes, that was there. The weight of societal expectation that one should care about a dying parent regardless of the damage that parent had inflicted. "I don't want to," Daniel said slowly, "but I think I need to. Not for him, for me. To close something that's been open too long." Marcus nodded. "I'll cover for you here. Take the rest of the week if you need it. And Daniel?" He waited until Daniel met his eyes. "Call Mia. Tell her what's happening. Don't shut her out because this is hard." The thought of calling Mia, of potentially burdening her with this when they'd only just begun, made Daniel's chest tighten with anxiety. But Marcus was right. If he wanted this to be different, if he wanted to learn how to let someone in, he had to start now. Back at his desk, Daniel pulled up Mia's contact information. They'd exchanged numbers years ago, one of those practical neighbor exchanges that had never led to actual communication. His finger hovered over the call button, anxiety warring with the memory of her voice that morning. "Don't overthink this. Don't talk yourself out of what's happening between us." He pressed call before he could change his mind. She answered on the second ring, slightly breathless.
Daniel, is everything okay? I'm on break, but I can talk.
My father had a stroke, Daniel said, the words coming out abrupt and graceless. I'm sorry. I know we were supposed to have dinner tonight, but I need to go see him. He's in a hospital 3 hours away. I don't know how long I'll be gone. Silence stretched across the line, and Daniel felt panic rising. He'd done exactly what he always did, dumped his problems and waited for rejection. Daniel, Mia's voice was gentle but firm. Breathe. I can hear you spiraling from here. He forced air into his lungs, gripping his desk with his free hand. First, don't apologize for this, Mia continued. Second, of course dinner can wait. This is important. Are you okay? Do you need anything? I don't know, Daniel admitted. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. We haven't spoken in 14 years. He wasn't a good father. I don't know why I'm even going. Maybe you need closure, Mia suggested. Or maybe you need to see him one more time to confirm that leaving was the right choice. Or maybe you're going because, despite everything, there's a part of you that still hopes for something different. She paused. There's no wrong answer here, Daniel. Whatever you're feeling or not feeling is valid. The knot in Daniel's chest loosened slightly. I'm scared I'll get there and he'll still find a way to make me feel worthless. Even dying, he'll probably manage it. Then you'll remember that his assessment of you was never accurate, Mia said firmly. You'll remember that you survived him, that you built a life despite him, and that the person you've become is someone worth knowing. Someone I want to know. Daniel closed his eyes, absorbing her words like medicine. I'm sorry about dinner. Stop apologizing. We'll have hundreds of dinners. This is more important. He heard voices in the background, someone calling her name. I have to get back to my patients, but Daniel? Drive safely. And if you need to talk while you're there, call me. Anytime, day or night. I mean that. Thank you, he whispered. That's what this is, Mia said softly. That's what we're building, being there for each other when it's hard. I'll be here when you get back, I promise. The call ended and Daniel sat at his desk, feeling simultaneously gutted and supported in a way he'd never experienced before. Marcus appeared at his cubicle entrance, car keys in hand. Come on, Marcus said. I'm driving you home to pack. You're in no shape to be behind a wheel right now. Daniel didn't argue. On the drive back to his apartment, Marcus filled the silence with practical considerations: what to pack, how long the drive would take, whether Daniel should call ahead to the hospital. It was easier to focus on logistics than emotions, and Daniel was grateful for Marcus's understanding of that. At his building, Marcus insisted on coming up, helping Daniel throw clothes into a bag with more efficiency than Daniel could manage alone. As they worked, Marcus kept up a steady stream of conversation that required minimal responses: updates about the office, observations about the weather, anything to keep Daniel anchored in the present instead of spiraling into the past. They were almost finished when Mia's door opened. She stood in the hallway still wearing her scrubs, clearly having just gotten home from her shift. I left early, she said, looking at Daniel. Told them I had a family emergency. I wanted to see you before you left. Marcus glanced between them, then grabbed Daniel's bag. I'll wait in the car. Give you two a minute. He nodded at Mia with clear approval as he passed. Alone in the hallway, their hallway, the space that had contained so much unspoken longing, Daniel and Mia stood looking at each other. She moved first, closing the distance and wrapping her arms around him in a hug that felt like coming home. Daniel stood frozen for a moment. Then his arms came up, holding her tightly, his face pressing into her hair. You don't have to be strong about this, Mia murmured against his chest. You don't have to pretend it doesn't hurt or that you're fine. Whatever you're feeling is okay. I don't know what I'm feeling, Daniel admitted. That's the problem. Shouldn't I feel something? Grief or an anger or anything other than this numbness? Mia pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. You're protecting yourself. That's okay. Maybe when you get there, something will shift. Or maybe it won't. Either way, you'll handle it. She reached up, cupping his face with both hands. And when you come back, I'll be here. We'll still have dinner. We'll still talk about everything. This doesn't change what's happening between us unless you let it. What if I come back different? The question emerged raw, vulnerable.
What if seeing him brings back all the old patterns, all the things I've tried to leave behind? Then we'll deal with it together, Mia said simply. Daniel, I'm not going anywhere. Not because of this. Not because things get complicated. I told you last night, I've been waiting 2 years. I can be patient while you handle this. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a promise rather than a demand. When she pulled back, she pressed something into his hand, a small smooth stone, the kind sold in gift shops with inspirational words etched on the surface. This one simply said, "Courage." I bought this months ago, Mia confessed. I was going to give it to you if you ever actually knocked on my door. Seems like now's the right time. Daniel closed his fingers around the stone, feeling its solid weight. Thank you. For this. For everything. Go, Mia said, stepping back. Deal with your past so we can build our future, and Daniel, text me when you get there. Let me know you're safe. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and headed down to where Marcus waited. As he climbed into the passenger seat, he looked back to see Mia still standing in the hallway, watching him go. She raised her hand in a small wave, and Daniel felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, exactly, but the knowledge that for the first time in his life he had someone to come back to. The drive stretched ahead, 3 hours of highway that would carry him back to a town he'd tried to forget, to a father who'd never learned how to love him, to a past that had shaped him in ways he was still trying to understand. But in his pocket, the stone Mia had given him pressed against his thigh, a solid reminder that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. Marcus drove in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing over to check on Daniel, but not pushing for conversation. As the city gave way to suburbs, then to the rural landscapes of Daniel's childhood, memories began surfacing despite his best efforts to keep them submerged. The old barn where he'd hidden when his father's anger grew too intense. The library where he'd spent every possible moment, losing himself in books that offered escape. The high school where he'd learned to be invisible, to move through crowds without drawing attention that might somehow get back to his father. You want to talk about it? Marcus finally asked as they passed a sign indicating they were 20 miles from their destination. I left the day after graduation, Daniel heard himself say. Full scholarship to a state school 4 hours away. I packed one bag, caught a bus, and never looked back. Never called. Never visited. For 18 years, I survived him. Then I just stopped trying. Did he try to contact you? Once. A letter, maybe 5 years ago, forwarded through some administrative database. No apology, no acknowledgement of anything that happened. Just a reminder that he'd raised me, that I owed him gratitude, that my silence was proof of my ingratitude and weakness. Daniel's hands clenched in his lap. I threw it away without finishing it. And now he's dying, Marcus said quietly, and you're going to see him anyway. I don't know why, Daniel admitted. Mia said maybe I need closure, but I don't know what that means. What am I supposed to say to him? Thanks for the trauma. Sorry you're dying. Maybe you don't say anything to him, Marcus suggested. Maybe this trip is about you, not him. About seeing that he's just a person, a damaged, limited person who hurt you because he didn't know better or couldn't do better. About confirming that you escaped, that you survived, that you built something better than what he gave you. The hospital appeared on the horizon, a sprawling complex that seemed too modern for the small town surrounding it. Marcus pulled into the parking lot, turned off the engine, and looked at Daniel. I can come in with you, he offered, or I can wait here, or I can get a hotel room and be available if you need me, whatever you need. Daniel thought about Mia's words. Being there for each other when it's hard. About Marcus's presence throughout this entire day, steady and undemanding. About learning to accept help instead of insisting on handling everything alone. Come in with me, he said, at least for now. I don't know what I'm walking into. They entered the hospital together, following signs to the ICU. The nurse at the station checked Daniel's ID, confirmed his relationship to the patient, and directed him to room 317. As they walked down the corridor, Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs, childhood fear rising despite his adult understanding that his father was now the powerless one. Room 317's door stood partially open. Daniel paused outside, hand on the frame, gathering courage. Marcus stood slightly behind him, a solid presence. You've got this, Marcus murmured. Daniel pushed the door open and stepped inside. The man in the bed bore only passing resemblance to the father Daniel remembered. Thomas Brooks had been large, imposing, his physical presence as intimidating as his words. The person connected to various monitors and IVs was diminished, somehow smaller, his face slack on one side from the stroke's damage. His eyes were closed, his breathing assisted by oxygen, and for a moment Daniel felt nothing but surreal disconnection. This fragile stranger couldn't be the man who dominated his entire childhood. A doctor appeared behind them, introducing herself as Dr. Patel. She explained the situation with clinical efficiency: massive stroke, significant brain damage, uncertain prognosis. The next 48 hours would determine whether Thomas Brooks would survive, and if so, in what capacity. "Has he been conscious?" Daniel asked. "Briefly, early this morning. He asked for you." Dr. Patel consulted her chart. "He said your name several times. We're not sure what level of cognitive function he has right now. The damage was extensive." After the doctor left, Daniel stood at the foot of the bed, staring at his father, waiting for some emotion to surface. Grief, anger, relief, something. Instead, there was just that same numbness, protective and complete. "Daniel." His father's voice was weak, slurred, but unmistakable. His eyes had opened, or at least one had, the other remaining droopy from the stroke. "You came." "Yeah," Daniel said. "I came. Didn't think you would." Each word seemed to require enormous effort. "Thought you hated me." Did. Daniel examined the statement, turning it over in his mind. Did he hate his father? It would be simpler if he did. Hate was clean, straightforward. What he actually felt was more complicated, a tangled mess of old fear, justified anger, and something that might have been grief for the relationship they'd never had. "I don't hate you," Daniel said quietly. "I don't think I feel anything for you at all, and that's probably sadder than hate." Thomas's visible eye moved to Marcus, standing in the doorway. "Who's that?" "A friend, someone who knows how to care about people without destroying them." The words landed like stones. Thomas's face, the half that still moved, twisted into something that might have been pain. "I tried. Did the best I could." "No, you didn't." Daniel's voice was calm, factual. "You took your own damage and passed it down to me. You made me believe I was worthless, that wanting connection made me weak, that every mistake was evidence of fundamental brokenness. You didn't do your best. You just did what was easiest for you, and it hurt me every single day of the 18 years we lived together." Silence filled the room, broken only by the beep of monitors. Thomas's eye closed again, and for a moment Daniel thought he'd slipped back into unconsciousness. Then, "I'm sorry." 2 words. After 32 years, 2 simple words that should have meant everything. Instead, they felt empty, insufficient, too little and far too late. "Thank you for saying that," Daniel said, meaning it even if the apology couldn't undo decades of damage. "I hope you mean it." Thomas Brooks didn't respond to Daniel's statement about hoping he meant his apology. His eye had closed again, his breathing settling into a rhythm that suggested he'd slipped back into unconscious rest. Daniel stood there, watching the rise and fall of his father's chest, and felt the strangest sensation, not relief that the conversation was over, but disappointment that it hadn't gone deeper. Some part of him, buried beneath years of protective numbness, had apparently been hoping for more than 2 words of apology. Marcus touched his shoulder gently. "You want to stay, or do you want to get out of here?" Daniel looked at the man in the bed one more time, this diminished version of the person who'd haunted his nightmares for decades. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Am I supposed to sit here and wait? Talk to him more? I spent 18 years trying to escape him, and now I'm standing here wondering if I should hold his hand while he dies." "There's no supposed to," Marcus said quietly. "There's just what you can live with, what will let you sleep at night when this is over." Before Daniel could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from Mia. "Did you make it safely? Thinking about you." The simple message grounded him, reminded him that he had a life waiting beyond this hospital room, beyond this reckoning with his past. He typed back, "I'm here. He's unconscious mostly. Don't know how long I'll stay." Then, after a pause, "Thank you for the stone. For everything." Her response came quickly. "You're stronger than you think. Whatever you decide is the right choice. Call if you need to hear a friendly voice." Daniel pocketed his phone and turned to Marcus. "Let's find somewhere to sit. Somewhere I can think without staring at him." They discovered a small waiting area down the hall, furnished with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. A coffee machine in the corner dispensed something that barely qualified as coffee, but Daniel got a cup anyway, needing something to hold. Marcus settled beside him, pulling out his own phone to give Daniel space while staying present. "When your mom died," Daniel said after several minutes of silence, "did you get to say goodbye? Did you get closure?" Marcus looked up from his phone, his expression thoughtful. "I gotta say goodbye, yeah. She was in hospice for 3 weeks. I sat with her, told her I loved her, thanked her for being a good mother. It was peaceful." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I'm not sure it gave me closure. Closure isn't really a thing, you know. It's not like you have one conversation and suddenly everything's resolved. You just learn to carry the loss differently, to integrate it into who you are." "But you loved your mother," Daniel said. "She was good to you. This is different. I don't know how to mourn someone I spent most of my life trying to forget." "Maybe you're not mourning him," Marcus suggested. "Maybe you're mourning the father you deserved to have and didn't. Maybe you're mourning the relationship you should have had, the childhood you should have experienced." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "When my dad left, before my mom got sick, I was furious at him, spent years angry, and when I heard he died in a car accident, I thought I'd feel vindicated or relieved or something. Instead, I just felt sad. Not because I lost him, I'd already lost him when he walked out, but because the door finally closed on any possibility that he'd come back and be the father I'd needed." Daniel absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. "Did you go to his funeral?" "No. I decided that showing up would have been for other people's expectations, not for me. I said my goodbyes in my own way, in my own time." Marcus met Daniel's eyes. "There's no rule that says you have to perform grief or forgiveness or reconciliation for anyone's benefit. You get to decide what you need." A nurse appeared in the doorway of the waiting area. "Mr. Brooks, your father is awake again and asking for you. He seems more lucid than before." Daniel felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. Part of him wanted to refuse, to walk out of this hospital and never look back. But Mia's stone pressed against his leg through his pocket, and he remembered her words. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it." "I'll go," he said, standing. "Marcus, you don't have to—" "I'm coming," Marcus said firmly. "You don't have to do this alone." Back in room 317, Thomas Brooks looked marginally more alert. Someone had adjusted his bed so he was sitting slightly upright, and though his face still showed the effects of the stroke, his one working eye tracked Daniel's movement with clear recognition. "Thought you'd left," Thomas said, the words still slurred but more comprehensible than before. "I considered it," Daniel admitted, pulling a chair close to the bed. Marcus positioned himself near the door, present but not intrusive. "I'm not sure why I'm still here." "Because you're better than me," Thomas said, and the words came out heavy with something that might have been regret. "Always were. Even as a kid. You had kindness in you that I tried to beat out." The admission hung in the air between them. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Why did you hate it so much? The kindness. Why did you treat it like weakness? Thomas's eye closed briefly, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "My father was worse than me, if that's possible to believe. Kindness got you hurt in our house. Showing emotion got you punished. I learned early that the world was cruel, and anyone who didn't toughen up would be destroyed by it." He paused, struggling for breath. "I thought I was preparing you, thought I was making you strong enough to survive." "You were just repeating the pattern," Daniel said, and there was no anger in his voice, just sad clarity. "Passing down the same damage your father gave you. Did it ever occur to you to break the cycle instead of perpetuating it?" "Every day," Thomas admitted, and there were tears sliding down the functioning side of his face now. Every damn day I knew I was failing you, but I didn't know how to be different. The only parenting I understood was the kind I'd received. I told myself you'd thank me someday, that you'd be strong and successful, and you'd understand I'd done it out of love. It wasn't love, Daniel said flatly. Love doesn't make a child afraid to exist. Love doesn't teach them they're fundamentally unworthy of affection or connection. You didn't love me. You controlled me because it was the only way you knew how to relate to another person. Thomas flinched at the words, but he didn't argue. You're right. I didn't know how to love you. I didn't know how to love anyone, including myself. He struggled to move his working hand, finally managing to lift it slightly. I'm sorry, Daniel. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't undo 32 years of damage, but I need you to know. My failures as a father had nothing to do with who you were. You were a good kid, a sensitive, thoughtful, kind kid, and I tried to crush that out of you because I was too broken to appreciate it. Daniel stared at his father's outstretched hand. This man who'd caused him so much pain, now reduced to pleading for absolution from a hospital bed. Part of him wanted to walk away, to let Thomas die with his apology unaccepted. But another part, the part that Mia had seen and valued, the part Marcus had nurtured in their friendship, understood that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the harm. It was about refusing to let that harm continue defining his future. He took his father's hand. The skin was papery, fragile, nothing like the strong hands he remembered striking him as a child. I forgive you, Daniel said quietly, not because you deserve it, not because your apology fixes what you broke, but because I refuse to carry your damage for the rest of my life. I forgive you so I can let it go, so I can build something better than what you gave me. Thomas's tears were flowing freely now, his breathing ragged with emotion. Thank you, he whispered. You're a better man than I ever was, than I ever could have been. I know, Daniel said, and there was no cruelty in the acknowledgement, just truth. I survived you, and I chose to be different. That's not because of you, it's in spite of you. They sat in silence for several minutes, Daniel holding his father's hand, feeling the weak pulse beneath the skin. It wasn't reconciliation, exactly. It wasn't the kind of deathbed redemption portrayed in movies. But it was real and honest, and perhaps that was more valuable than any Hollywood ending. Finally, Thomas spoke again, his voice fading. The woman you mentioned, in the cafe. Did you go to her? Daniel felt surprise ripple through him. You heard that? In the cafe? Nurse told me. Said you'd been on a date when someone interrupted. Asked if that was why you came. Out of obligation. Thomas managed something that might have been a smile with half his face. Tell me you went to her. Tell me you didn't let fear stop you the way it stopped me from ever finding happiness. I did, Daniel said. Her name is Mia. She's been my neighbor for 3 years. She told me she'd been waiting for me to notice her, and I'd been too scared to believe someone like her could want someone like me. Because I taught you that, Thomas said sadly. I taught you that you weren't worthy of love. That's maybe the worst thing I did, worse than the anger, worse than the criticism. I made you believe you didn't deserve happiness. I'm learning differently now, Daniel replied. Mia's teaching me. My friend Marcus is teaching me. I'm teaching myself. It's not easy, undoing 32 years of your lessons. But I'm trying. Good. Thomas's eye was closing again, exhaustion pulling him under. Be happy, Daniel. Build something beautiful. Don't waste your life the way I wasted mine. The monitors beeped steadily as Thomas drifted back into unconsciousness. Daniel released his father's hand gently, standing and backing away from the bed. He felt hollowed out, emotionally exhausted but also somehow lighter, as if confronting his past had released pressure he hadn't known he'd been carrying. Marcus stood as Daniel approached the door. You okay? I don't know, Daniel admitted, but I think I said what I needed to say, heard what I needed to hear. I don't need to stay anymore. They walked out of the hospital together into late afternoon sunshine that felt almost aggressive after the sterile dimness inside. In the parking lot, Daniel pulled out his phone and called Mia without letting himself overthink it. She answered immediately. Hey, she said, warmth flooding through the single syllable. How are you holding up? I saw him, Daniel said. We talked. He apologized.
I told him I forgave him. The words spilled out in a rush, and suddenly Daniel felt everything he'd been holding back crash over him like a wave. His voice cracked. Mia, I forgave him, but I don't know if I meant it. I don't know if I can ever really forgive him for all of it. Daniel, breathe, Mia said gently. Forgiveness isn't a one-time thing. It's a process. You said the words because you needed to say them, because you needed to release yourself from the obligation to carry his damage. Whether you fully feel it now doesn't matter. You'll grow into it. I want to come home, Daniel said, and the admission felt childlike, vulnerable. I want to be in my apartment, in our hallway, somewhere that feels safe. Then come home, Mia replied immediately. Marcus can drive you back tonight, or you can stay there if you need to be present if your father's condition changes. But Daniel, whatever you choose, I'm here. Our dinner can wait. Our conversations can wait. I'm not going anywhere. Marcus had moved a polite distance away to give Daniel privacy, but he glanced over when Daniel gestured to him. Daniel covered the phone's microphone.
Can we go back tonight? I don't want to stay here. Marcus nodded immediately, pulling out his keys. We're leaving now, Daniel told Mia. I'll be home in a few hours. I know it's late, but I'll wait up, Mia said. I'll be here when you get back. We can talk, or we can just sit together, or you can go to your apartment and be alone if that's what you need. Whatever helps. After they disconnected, Daniel stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking back at the hospital. His father was in there, possibly dying, and Daniel was choosing to leave. A year ago, even a week ago, that choice would have been impossible. He would have stayed out of obligation, out of the ingrained belief that his needs didn't matter, that duty always superseded personal well-being. But Mia was right. He'd said what he needed to say. He'd heard his father's apology. He'd extended forgiveness, even if it would take time to fully embody it. Staying longer wouldn't change anything except to drain him further. Let's go home, he said to Marcus. The drive back felt different than the journey out. Daniel dozed intermittently, exhausted by emotional labor, while Marcus navigated traffic and played quiet music that asked nothing of either of them. When Daniel was awake, they talked, not about Thomas or the hospital, but about mundane things. Marcus shared updates about his dating life, about a new restaurant he'd tried, about his mother's upcoming birthday, and his plans to visit her grave. Do you think I'm a coward for leaving? Daniel asked during one stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever. No, Marcus said without hesitation. I think you're someone who knows their limits, who understands that you can't pour from an empty cup. Staying would have been about performing for an audience that doesn't matter. Leaving is about honoring what you actually need. My father said I was better than him, Daniel said quietly. That I always had been. It was the first time he ever acknowledged that maybe I wasn't the problem. How did that feel? Daniel considered the question carefully. Validating, I guess, but also sad. Because if he knew that, if he could see it clearly enough to say it on what might be his deathbed, why couldn't he see it when it would have mattered? Why did it take him dying to admit I was worthy of basic respect? Because people are complicated, Marcus said. Because your father was damaged in ways that made it impossible for him to be the parent you needed when you needed it. That's a tragedy, Daniel, for you and for him. But it doesn't have to define the rest of your life. They reached the city just after 9 p.m. Marcus offered to come up to the apartment to stay for a while, but Daniel shook his head. I need to see Mia. I don't know, I just need to see her. Then go, Marcus said, pulling Daniel into a brief, tight hug. And call me tomorrow. Let me know you're okay. Daniel climbed the stairs to the third floor slowly, his body heavy with exhaustion. The hallway was quiet. Most of his neighbors already settled for the night. Light showed under Mia's door, and before he could second-guess himself, Daniel knocked. She opened the door immediately, as if she'd been waiting right there. She'd changed into comfortable clothes, soft pants and an oversized sweater, and her hair was down, falling around her shoulders. When she saw Daniel's face, whatever she'd been planning to say died unspoken. She simply opened her arms. Daniel walked into her embrace, and something inside him broke open. The tears he'd held back in the hospital, the emotions he'd suppressed during the drive, all of it came pouring out in great shuddering sobs against Mia's shoulder. She held him tightly, one hand stroking his hair, murmuring soft reassurances that he couldn't quite hear over the sound of his own crying.
She guided him inside her apartment, closing the door on the hallway and the rest of the world. They sank onto her couch together, Mia pulling Daniel close, letting him cry without trying to fix it or make it stop. It was the kind of witnessing Daniel had never experienced. Someone seeing him completely fall apart and not flinching, not withdrawing, not making his pain about their discomfort. When the storm finally passed, leaving Daniel empty and exhausted, Mia handed him tissues and waited while he pulled himself together. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to—" "Stop," Mia interrupted gently. "No apologizing for having feelings, no apologizing for needing support. That's not how this works." "How does this work?" Daniel asked. "I don't know how to do this. How to be with someone. How to let someone see me like this." Mia shifted so she could see his face, her hands cupping his cheeks with infinite tenderness. "You just did it. That's how it works. You show up, you're honest about what you're feeling, you let me hold you when you need holding. And when I need the same, you do it for me. That's what being together means." "What if I'm not good at it?" The fear that had been lurking beneath everything else finally surfaced. "What if I'm too damaged, too broken, too much work?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Mia said firmly. "Daniel, I'm not some perfect person with no issues. I have my own damage, my own fears. I get anxious about abandonment because my ex made me feel like I was never enough. I overwork because helping sick kids feels easier than dealing with my own problems. I'm terrified of letting people see me vulnerable because vulnerability has always led to pain." She smiled sadly. "We're both works in progress. The question isn't whether we're broken. Everyone's broken in some way. The question is whether we're willing to work on it together." Daniel searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or reservation. All he found was steady certainty, the same expression she'd worn when she walked into that cafe and asked why he hadn't chosen her. "I want to try," he said. "I'm scared, but I want to try. With you." "That's all I'm asking for," Mia replied. "Just try. Show up. Be honest. Let me be part of your life instead of keeping me at arm's length." "My father's dying," Daniel said, the words coming easier now. "Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about that. Part of me wants him to die so I can finally be free of him. Part of me wants him to live so I can have more time to, I don't know, understand him maybe. Figure out how to fully forgive him." "Both of those feelings can be true at the same time," Mia said. "You can want freedom and want understanding. You can forgive him and still be angry. Emotions aren't logical, Daniel. They don't have to make sense or fit neatly into boxes." They sat together in the quiet of her apartment, the television playing something on mute, the city sounds filtering in through partially open windows. Daniel felt the exhaustion of the day settling into his bones, but he didn't want to leave, didn't want to retreat to his own apartment and his own solitude. "Can I stay here tonight?" he asked quietly. I just don't want to be alone." Mia kissed his forehead. "Of course you can stay. I'll get you some blankets for the couch." "Actually," Daniel said, gathering courage, Could we just sleep together? Like, actually sleep. I just want to be close to someone. To you." The vulnerability in making such a request felt almost overwhelming, but Mia's face softened with understanding. "Yes," she said simply, "we can do that." She led him to her bedroom, a space he'd only imagined before. It was warm and lived in, books stacked on nightstands, fairy lights strung along one wall casting soft shadows. She gave him comfortable clothes to sleep in, sweatpants and a t-shirt that smelled like her laundry detergent, and turned away while he changed, offering privacy even in intimacy. When they finally lay down together, Mia curled against Daniel's side, her head on his chest, her arm draped across his waist. He held her close, feeling her steady breathing, the warmth of her body against his, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt safe. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For this, for seeing me, for not running away. Thank you for letting me in," Mia whispered back, "for being brave enough to show me who you really are." They lay in silence for a while, and Daniel thought Mia had fallen asleep when she spoke again. "Tell me something good." Something that made you happy today, even just for a moment.
Daniel thought back through the difficult hours, looking for light in the darkness. "When I called you from the hospital parking lot," he said finally, "and you said you'd be here when I got back. That moment, knowing I had someone to come home to, that made me happy. Terrified, but happy." "Tell me something you're looking forward to," Mia prompted.
"Tomorrow morning," Daniel said. "Waking up here with you, not having to pretend I'm fine or that I have everything figured out. Just being honest about where I am and knowing you'll still be here." Mia pressed a kiss to his chest, over his heart. "I'll be here. Tomorrow morning, and the day after that, and all the days after. This isn't temporary for me, Daniel. I'm choosing you, all of you, the scared parts, the broken parts, the parts you think aren't worth knowing. I'm choosing all of it." Daniel felt tears threatening again, but these were different. Not grief or pain, but gratitude and something that might have been the beginning of hope. "I'm choosing you too," he said. "I don't know how to do this perfectly, but I'm choosing to try." "Perfect is boring anyway," Mia murmured, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "I'll take honest and imperfect over perfect, and distant, any day." As Mia's breathing evened out into sleep, Daniel lay awake in the darkness, processing everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, he'd been sitting in an office, dreading a blind date, convinced he was destined for permanent loneliness. Now he was lying in Mia's bed, having confronted his dying father, having cried in front of someone who hadn't flinched, having accepted comfort he didn't know he was allowed to need. His phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A text from the hospital. His father's condition had stabilized. He was expected to survive the night.
Daniel stared at the message, trying to decipher how he felt about that news. Relief? Disappointment? Some complicated mixture of both? He set the phone down and pulled Mia closer, pressing his face into her hair. Whatever happened with his father, whatever happened tomorrow or next week or next year, he had this. He had someone who saw him clearly and chose to stay. He had Marcus's steady friendship. He had proven to himself that he could face his past without being destroyed by it. For someone who'd spent 32 years believing he was fundamentally unworthy of love, that felt like a revolution. Daniel finally let himself drift toward sleep, Mia warm and solid against him, the weight of the day slowly lifting as exhaustion claimed him. His last conscious thought was that courage, as it turned out, wasn't the absence of fear. It was showing up anyway. It was letting yourself be seen anyway. It was choosing connection even when every instinct screamed to protect yourself through isolation. It was knocking on a door you'd passed 1,000 times and finally letting yourself be welcomed inside. Morning arrived with soft insistence, sunlight filtering through Mia's curtains and painting patterns across the bedroom wall. Daniel woke slowly, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar surroundings before memory returned. The hospital, his father's apology, the drive home, falling apart in Mia's arms. He became aware of warmth against his side, the gentle rhythm of someone else's breathing, and turned his head to find Mia still asleep, her face peaceful and unguarded in the early light. He studied her quietly, this woman who'd walked into a cafe and changed the entire trajectory of his life. Her dark hair spread across the pillow, one hand tucked under her cheek, and Daniel felt something expand in his chest. Not quite love yet, but the recognition that love could exist here, that he was standing at the threshold of something profound and terrifying and absolutely worth pursuing. Mia's eyes opened, focusing on him with immediate clarity that suggested she'd been awake longer than he'd realized. "Hi," she said softly, smiling. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," Daniel admitted. "I don't remember the last time I woke up and didn't immediately feel alone." "You're not alone anymore," Mia said, reaching out to touch his face gently. "That's what this is, what we're building. You get to wake up knowing someone cares about you. Someone wants to hear about your dreams and your fears and everything in between." Daniel caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I got a text last night, after you fell asleep. My father's condition stabilized. They think he'll survive." "How do you feel about that?" It was such a simple question, but it cut through to the heart of everything Daniel had been trying to process since leaving the hospital. "Relieved, I think. Which surprises me. I thought I'd want it to be over.
But maybe I needed him to hear my forgiveness. Maybe I needed him to have time to sit with what he did, to really understand the damage. If he died last night, it would have been too easy for him. Mia propped herself up on one elbow, her expression thoughtful. That's not vindictive, Daniel. That's wanting accountability. There's a difference between wanting someone to suffer and wanting them to genuinely reckon with their actions. I don't know if he's capable of that kind of reckoning, Daniel said, but at least now there's a possibility. At least the conversation doesn't have to end with his apology and my forgiveness. Maybe there can be more. And if there can't, Mia asked gently, if he goes back to the same patterns, the same denial, then I'll know I tried, Daniel said. I'll know I extended compassion even when it wasn't deserved, and I can walk away with a clear conscience. That's all I can control, my own actions, my own choices about who I want to be. They lay together for a while longer, talking quietly about nothing and everything. Mia shared that she had the day off, a rare Wednesday, where the hospital scheduler had taken pity on her after months of overtime. Daniel admitted he'd already texted his supervisor the night before, asking for a few personal days to handle family matters. The work could wait. For once in his life, something mattered more than maintaining perfect attendance and proving his competence through relentless reliability. What do you want to do today? Mia asked. We could stay in, or we could go out. We could talk more about your father, or we could deliberately not talk about heavy things. Whatever you need. Daniel thought about it, examining what he actually wanted rather than what he thought he should want. I want to do normal things with you. I want to learn what a regular day looks like when I'm not hiding in my apartment or losing myself in work. I want to see what it's like to just exist with someone. Mia's smile was brilliant. I can work with that. Fair warning, though, my version of normal includes terrible cooking, singing off key to whatever music is playing, and at least 3 cups of coffee before I'm fully functional. That sounds perfect, Daniel said, meaning it. They got up eventually, moving through morning routines with the kind of comfortable domesticity Daniel had only witnessed in other people's lives. Mia made coffee in a French press, talking constantly about her opinions on different brewing methods while Daniel listened, fascinated by her passion for something so mundane. He helped her make breakfast, scrambled eggs that came out slightly rubbery because they got distracted talking and forgot to watch the pan. See? Mia said, poking at the eggs with a fork. Terrible cooking, I warned you. They're eggs, Daniel said. They're fine. Better than fine. They're eggs you made, which makes them special. Mia laughed, that bright sound he was beginning to love. You're going to have to work on your standards if we're doing this. I can't have you setting the bar so low that burned toast counts as gourmet. The casual mention of a future together, of doing this, of shared meals and lowered standards and inside jokes about cooking disasters, settled into Daniel's chest like an anchor. This was what he'd been missing all these years. Not grand romantic gestures or perfect moments, but the ordinary magic of sharing space with someone who made the mundane feel meaningful. After breakfast, they migrated to Mia's couch with their coffee, and Daniel noticed a stack of photograph albums on her bookshelf. Can I look at these? He asked. Of course. Mia pulled one down, settling beside him. Fair warning, there are some truly embarrassing teenage photos in there. My mom refused to let me have a normal haircut for most of high school. They spent the next hour going through Mia's history, her childhood in a small town upstate, her large extended family that gathered for every holiday, her journey to nursing school and the friends she'd made along the way. She narrated each photo with warmth and humor, occasionally cringing at fashion choices or hairstyles, and Daniel absorbed it all hungrily. This was what normal looked like. People who took photos, who preserved memories, who had enough happy moments to fill albums. What about you? Mia asked eventually, closing the album. Do you have pictures from growing up? Daniel shook his head. My father didn't believe in taking photos. He said they were frivolous, a waste of money. I think I have maybe 3 pictures from my entire childhood, and they're all school photos that were required. Mia's hand found his, squeezing gently. Then we'll make new memories. Better ones. We'll take so many pictures you'll get sick of seeing your own face. I'd like that, Daniel said quietly. I'd like to have proof that good things happened, that I existed in moments worth remembering. His phone rang, interrupting the moment. The hospital again.
Daniel's stomach tightened as he answered. Mr. Brooks, this is Dr. Patel. I wanted to update you on your father's condition. He's awake and stable, and he's been asking to speak with you again. I understand this is difficult, but he seems quite insistent. He says there are things he needs to tell you while he still has the chance. Daniel looked at Mia, who was watching him with concerned attention. Can it wait until tomorrow? I'm not ready to go back there yet. Of course, Dr. Patel said. I'll let him know you'll visit when you're able. Mr. Brooks, one more thing. The social worker would like to discuss your father's long-term care needs with you. The stroke has left him with significant impairment. He'll need assistance going forward, possibly nursing home placement. As his only family, those decisions may fall to you. After the call ended, Daniel sat in silence, processing this new information. His father wasn't just dying. He was surviving, but surviving in a diminished state that would require care Daniel wasn't sure he could provide. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who denied him basic compassion now needed compassion desperately. What are you thinking? Mia asked softly. I'm thinking I don't know how to be responsible for someone who spent 18 years making me feel worthless, Daniel said. I forgave him, but that doesn't mean I want to manage his medical care or make decisions about where he lives. That feels like too much. Then don't, Mia said simply. Forgiveness doesn't require you to become his caretaker. You can forgive someone and still maintain boundaries. You can wish him well and still protect yourself from taking on responsibilities that would damage your own well-being. What kind of person does that make me? Daniel asked. What kind of person walks away from their dying father? A person who understands that you can't pour from an empty cup, Mia replied. A person who knows that setting boundaries is healthy, not cruel. Daniel, you don't owe him caretaking. You don't owe him your emotional labor or your physical presence. You gave him forgiveness, which was generous. Anything beyond that is your choice, not your obligation. Daniel absorbed her words, feeling the truth in them even as guilt tried to argue otherwise. I think I need to talk to Marcus about this. He's better at navigating the practical side of complicated family situations. Call him, Mia encouraged. I'll give you some space. But Daniel caught her hand as she started to stand. No, stay. I don't want space from you. I want you here while I figure this out. Mia settled back beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and Daniel called Marcus. His friend answered on the second ring, and Daniel explained the situation. His father's survival, the need for long-term care planning, his own confusion about what he owed versus what he could actually give. Marcus listened without interrupting, then said, Here's what I think. You get to decide how much involvement you're willing to have in your father's life going forward. Nobody else gets to make that choice for you. If you want to be involved in his care, that's valid. If you want to step back and let the state handle it, that's also valid. There's no moral high ground here, just what you can live with. The social worker is going to pressure me, Daniel said. They always do. They'll talk about family obligation and how he raised me and how I should step up. And you can listen politely and then explain your boundaries, Marcus replied. You can say that given your history, you're not in a position to provide hands-on care, but you're willing to be kept informed of major decisions. Or you can say that you need to step back entirely for your own mental health. Both of those responses are reasonable. I feel like I should want to take care of him, Daniel admitted. Like forgiveness should mean I'm willing to sacrifice myself for his well-being. That's not what forgiveness means, Marcus said firmly. Forgiveness is releasing the anger and resentment so it doesn't poison you. It's not signing up to be someone's martyr. You can forgive your father and still acknowledge that being his primary caretaker would be traumatic and unhealthy for you. Mia had been listening quietly, and now she added, There are professional caregivers who can help him. People who are trained for this and who don't have decades of painful history clouding their judgment. You can ensure he gets good care without providing it yourself. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. The recognition that he had options, that forgiveness didn't require self-destruction, that he could be compassionate without being consumed. Okay, he said. I'll talk to the social worker tomorrow. I'll make it clear that I'm willing to help coordinate care, but not provide it directly. I'll find him a good facility, make sure he's treated well, but I won't sacrifice my own recovery to become his nurse. That sounds healthy, Marcus said. And Daniel, I'm proud of you. A week ago, you would have immediately said yes to whatever they asked, regardless of the cost to yourself. The fact that you're even considering boundaries is huge progress. After they hung up, Mia pulled Daniel close, and he let himself sink into her embrace. "This is hard," he said against her shoulder, "trying to be a good person while also protecting myself. I don't know how to balance those things." "You're learning," Mia said. "That's all any of us can do. Learn as we go, make mistakes, adjust, try again. You don't have to get it perfect on the first try." They spent the rest of the day doing exactly what Daniel had asked for, normal things. They watched a movie, one of those romantic comedies Mia admitted she'd seen a dozen times and could recite by heart. She did exactly that, speaking dialogue in sync with the actors, and Daniel found himself laughing more genuinely than he could remember. They ordered lunch from a Thai place Mia loved, and she taught him how to use chopsticks properly when his kept dropping rice. "You're thinking too hard," she said, demonstrating the correct grip. "It's like everything else. You're trying to be perfect instead of just letting yourself be clumsy while you learn." "I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect," Daniel admitted. "It's the only way I knew how to avoid criticism." "Well, you're safe to be imperfect here," Mia said. "I promise not to judge you for dropped rice or incorrect chopstick technique or anything else that doesn't go perfectly." Late afternoon found them back on the couch, Mia reading while Daniel simply sat beside her, occasionally glancing at the pages of her book, but mostly just absorbing the peace of shared silence. His phone buzzed periodically with work emails that he ignored, and eventually Mia noticed. "You're allowed to check those," she said. "I won't be offended if you need to handle work things." "I don't want to," Daniel said. "For the first time in my career, I genuinely don't care about what's happening at the office. I'd rather be here doing nothing, with you." Mia set her book aside, turning to face him fully. "Can I ask you something potentially difficult?" Daniel nodded, bracing himself. "What do you want our relationship to look like going forward?" Mia asked. "I know it's early, and I know we're still figuring things out, but I need to understand what you're hoping for. Are we dating casually? Are we building towards something more serious? I don't need answers right now, but I need to know you're thinking about it." Daniel appreciated her directness, the way she asked for what she needed without apologizing for it. "I want serious," he said. "I want to build something real with you. I'm terrified of it, and I'll probably mess it up regularly, but I want to try. I want to learn how to be in a relationship, how to share my life with someone instead of just existing parallel to them." "I want that too," Mia said, relief evident in her voice. "I want us to be intentional about this. To communicate when things are hard instead of just hoping they'll get better. To be honest about our needs and our fears. I've done the casual thing before, and it always left me feeling emptier than being alone." "I've never done any kind of thing before," Daniel admitted. "I've had maybe 3 dates in my entire adult life, and none of them went past the first meeting. You're my first everything, basically. First person I've let myself care about. First person who's seen me cry. First person I've woken up next to." Mia's expression softened with understanding. "Then we'll figure it out together. You'll teach me patience, and I'll teach you that vulnerability isn't weakness. We'll both learn as we go." "What if I'm too damaged?" The question emerged quiet but insistent, the fear he kept circling back to. "What if all the therapy in the world can't undo what my father did? What if I end up hurting you because I don't know how to love someone properly?" "Then we'll work through it," Mia said firmly. "Daniel, everyone brings damage to relationships. Everyone has wounds that affect how they connect with others. The question isn't whether you're damaged. It's whether you're willing to work on healing, whether you're willing to be honest about your struggles, whether you can accept help when you need it." She took his hands in hers. "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for effort, for honesty, for the willingness to keep showing up even when it's hard." "I can do that," Daniel said. "I want to do that." "Then that's enough," Mia replied. "That's more than enough." As evening approached, Mia suggested they cook dinner together, an actual attempt at a proper meal rather than ordering in. Daniel admitted he'd never really learned to cook beyond the basics, and Mia laughed, saying she'd barely progressed beyond basics herself, but at least they could be incompetent together. They attempted a pasta dish that required more coordination than either of them possessed, resulting in overcooked noodles and a sauce that was simultaneously too thick and too watery. But they laughed through the disasters, and when they finally sat down to eat their imperfect creation, Daniel thought he'd never tasted anything better. "This is terrible," Mia said cheerfully, taking another bite. "We've created something truly special in its awfulness." "It's perfect," Daniel countered, "because we made it together. Because you didn't get frustrated when I forgot to stir the sauce. Because we're sitting here eating mediocre pasta and I'm happier than I've been in my entire life." Mia reached across the small table, linking her fingers with his. "You know what I think? I think you've been starving for connection for so long that even imperfect moments feel extraordinary. And that breaks my heart a little, because you deserved this all along. You deserved people who made you feel valued and wanted and like you belonged." "I'm starting to believe that," Daniel said quietly. "It's not easy. Every day I have to fight against the voice that says, I'm not worth this, that you'll realize your mistake and leave. But being with you makes it easier to question those thoughts instead of just accepting them as truth." "Good," Mia said. "Keep questioning them, and every time they get loud, tell me. Let me remind you of the truth, that you're worthy of love exactly as you are, that your presence adds value to my life, that I chose you and I keep choosing you." After dinner, they cleaned up together, washing dishes side by side in comfortable rhythm. Mia's apartment felt more like home than Daniel's own place ever had, and he found himself reluctant to leave when the evening grew late. But he also recognized the need for some space, for time to process everything that had happened over the past 2 days. "I should probably go home," he said, though the words felt wrong. "Give you some time to yourself." Mia turned from the dish rack, studying him. "Is that what you want, or what you think you should do?" Daniel considered the question honestly. "Both, maybe? I want to stay here with you forever, but I also feel like I shouldn't monopolize all your time. You have a life, routines, things you probably want to do without me hovering." "Here's what I want," Mia said, stepping closer. "I want you to stay again tonight if that's what you need. I want you to understand that being here isn't an imposition. It's a choice I'm actively making. But I also want you to feel comfortable going to your own space when you need it. This isn't an all-or-nothing thing, Daniel. You can stay sometimes and leave sometimes. You can want closeness and also need solitude. Both of those are okay." "I think I need to sleep in my own bed tonight," Daniel said slowly. "Not because I don't want to be with you, but because I need to prove to myself that I can be alone without feeling abandoned. That you being across the hall instead of right next to me doesn't mean you're gone." "That makes sense," Mia said. "And tomorrow, when you wake up alone, you can knock on my door and we'll have coffee together. You can learn that distance doesn't equal disconnection." They stood in her doorway, reluctant to part even for the 3 feet of hallway that separated their apartments. Mia rose on her toes and kissed him, not the chaste pecks they'd exchanged before, but something deeper, more certain. Daniel's hands came up to cup her face, and for a moment they stood suspended in that kiss, communicating everything words couldn't capture. "Good night, Daniel Brooks," Mia whispered when they finally pulled apart. "Thank you for today, for letting me see you, for being honest about what you need, for choosing to build this with me." "Good night, Mia Carter," Daniel replied. "Thank you for being patient with me, for not running away, for making me believe I'm worth staying for." He crossed to his own apartment, unlocking the door and stepping into space that felt both familiar and strange. The silence that had once been oppressive now felt merely quiet, a pause rather than a permanent state. Daniel moved through his evening routine, but his mind was full of Mia, her laugh, her touch, the way she saw through his defenses to the person underneath. His phone buzzed with a text from her. "I can hear you moving around through the wall. It's comforting, knowing you're right there. Sleep well." Daniel smiled, typing back, "Same. Knowing you're close makes the distance easier. Sweet dreams." He lay in his own bed, staring at his own ceiling, and felt the weight of the past 2 days settling into his bones. His father was alive and would need care Daniel wasn't equipped to provide. His relationship with Mia was new and terrifying and more hopeful than anything he'd experienced. His careful, controlled life had been completely upended, and instead of feeling panicked, he felt alive. Before sleep could claim him, Daniel heard it. 3 soft knocks on the wall from Mia's side. He smiled and knocked back, 3 answering taps. A moment later, his phone lit up with another text. "Just wanted to make sure you're real. That this is all really happening.
It's real, Daniel typed back. You're real. We're real. I'm learning to believe it. Good, came her response. Keep learning. I'll be here to remind you whenever you forget. Daniel set his phone aside and closed his eyes, letting exhaustion pull him under. His last conscious thought was that healing, as it turned out, wasn't a destination you reached. It was a process you lived through day by day, choice by choice, with people who refused to let you face it alone. And for the first time in 32 years, he wasn't alone. Morning arrived with the tentative quality of new beginnings, sunlight streaming through Daniel's windows and illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny messengers of possibility. He woke alone but not lonely, the memory of Mia's goodnight text still warm in his mind, and for the first time in years, his first thought upon waking wasn't anxiety about the day ahead, but anticipation for what it might hold. He was making coffee when 3 soft knocks sounded on his door. Daniel opened it to find Mia standing in the hallway, already dressed for the day in jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair still damp from the shower, holding 2 bagels and wearing a smile that made his heart stutter. "Good morning," she said. "I figured we could have breakfast together before you have to deal with the hospital and all the complicated things. Just us, just coffee and bagels, just normal." Daniel stepped aside to let her in, and she moved through his apartment with comfortable familiarity, setting the bagels on his small kitchen counter and examining his space with open curiosity. "You know," she said, "I've lived across the hall from you for 3 years, and I've never actually been inside your place. It's very you." "Meaning?" Daniel asked, amused despite himself. "Meaning it's neat and organized and missing any personal touches that might reveal who you actually are," Mia said gently. "No photos, no decorations, nothing that suggests anyone actually lives here rather than just exists between work shifts." Daniel looked around his apartment, seeing it through her eyes. She was right. It looked like a hotel room, temporary and impersonal, a space he'd never allowed himself to make into a home. "I never saw the point," he admitted. "I was just surviving, not living. Decorating felt like admitting I planned to stay, and I always thought I might need to run." "Run from what?" Mia asked, settling onto his couch with her bagel. "From everything. From myself, mostly. From the fear that if I put down roots anywhere, I'd become vulnerable. That people would see me and realize I wasn't worth knowing." Daniel joined her on the couch, their knees touching. "I kept everything temporary so leaving would be easier when it inevitably became necessary." "And now?" Mia prompted. "Now I'm starting to think maybe staying is worth the risk," Daniel said quietly. "Maybe building a life, a real life, not just a survival strategy, is something I'm allowed to want." They ate breakfast together, talking easily about small things. Mia shared that Mrs. Patterson had cornered her yesterday, wanting to know if that lovely boy from 3A had finally worked up the courage to ask her out. When Mia had confirmed they were together, their elderly neighbor had apparently clapped her hands in delight and declared she'd been waiting years for them to figure it out. "She said she could tell from the way you looked at me when you thought no one was watching," Mia said, smiling. "She said you had the expression of someone who'd found something precious and was too afraid to reach for it." Daniel felt heat creep up his neck. "I didn't think anyone noticed." "Everyone noticed, Daniel. Everyone except apparently you and me, who were both too busy being scared to see what was right in front of us." Mia reached over, linking her fingers with his. "But we're not scared anymore. Or at least, we're not letting the fear stop us." After breakfast, Daniel could no longer avoid the inevitable. He needed to return to the hospital, needed to have the conversation with the social worker about his father's future care. The thought filled him with dread, but Mia's presence made it bearable. "Do you want me to come with you?" she asked, as if reading his mind. "I don't have to be in the room if you don't want, but I could wait. Be there if you need support." Daniel thought about the old instinct to handle difficult things alone warring with his new understanding that accepting help wasn't weakness. "Yes," he said, "I want you there. Maybe not in the meeting itself, but knowing you're close. That would help." They drove to the hospital together in Mia's car, and during the 3-hour journey, they talked about everything and nothing. Mia shared stories from the pediatric ward, about brave kids facing impossible circumstances with more courage than most adults could muster. Daniel found himself telling her about his work,
about the satisfaction he found in making numbers balance and systems function smoothly, and she listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed she actually cared about his answers. "You know what I think?" Mia said as they crossed into the final stretch of highway. "I think you're drawn to accounting because it's one of the few areas of your life where you could have complete control. Where, if you did everything correctly, the outcome was predictable and stable." Daniel considered this. "You're probably right. Everything else felt chaotic and dangerous, but numbers were safe. They followed rules." "Do you still need that level of control?" Mia asked carefully. "Or are you ready to accept that some things, like relationships, like healing, like building a life, are messy and unpredictable, and that's okay?" "I'm trying to be ready," Daniel said. "Being with you is teaching me that uncertainty isn't always dangerous, that sometimes the best things come from taking risks I can't calculate in advance." The hospital loomed ahead, and Daniel felt his stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. But Mia's hand found his, squeezing gently, and he remembered he wasn't facing this alone anymore. Inside, the social worker, a tired-looking woman named Sandra Martinez, met them in a small conference room. She had the weary competence of someone who'd had too many difficult conversations about family obligations and limited resources. Daniel explained his situation clearly, using the language he and Marcus had discussed. He was willing to help coordinate care for his father, but due to their complicated history, he couldn't serve as primary caretaker. Sandra listened without judgment, taking notes. "I understand," she said when he finished. "Given your father's condition, he'll need placement in a skilled nursing facility. His insurance will cover some of it, but there will be costs. Are you willing to be involved in the placement process, to visit facilities and help make that decision?" Daniel thought about it, weighing his own capacity against what felt like reasonable responsibility. "Yes," he said finally. "I can do that. I want him to have good care, even if I can't provide it myself. But I need to be clear. My involvement will be limited. I can't be his daily visitor or his primary contact. I'll ensure he's in a good facility, but after that, I need to step back." "That's fair," Sandra said. "It's more than many people in your situation would offer. I have information about several facilities in this area. Would you be willing to visit a few in the next couple of days and make a decision?" After the meeting, Daniel found Mia in the waiting area, and she stood immediately when she saw his face. "How did it go?" "Better than I expected," Daniel said. "I'm going to help find him a place, make sure he's cared for, but then I'm done. I'm not signing up for guilt or obligation beyond that." "I'm proud of you," Mia said, and the simple statement made Daniel's chest warm with something that might have been pride in himself, a foreign but welcome feeling. They went to see Thomas together, Mia staying in the hallway while Daniel entered his father's room alone. Thomas was awake, looking slightly better than he had 2 days ago, though the stroke's effects were still evident in his slurred speech and limited movement. "You came back," Thomas said, surprise evident in his voice. "I said I would," Daniel replied, pulling a chair close to the bed. "I talked to the social worker. I'm going to help find you a good nursing facility, somewhere they'll take care of you properly." Thomas's working eyes studied him. "But you won't be visiting, won't be part of my daily life." "No," Daniel said honestly. "I can't do that. It wouldn't be healthy for either of us. But I'm going to make sure you're safe and cared for. That's what I can offer." "That's more than I deserve," Thomas said quietly. "After everything I did to you, the fact that you're even here, that you're helping at all, I don't have words for what that means." Daniel looked at his father, this broken man who'd caused so much pain, and felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness exactly. He'd already given that. This was something else. Acceptance, maybe. The recognition that his father was simply human, damaged, and limited, and doing the best he could with the tools he'd been given, even when that best had been devastatingly insufficient. "I need to ask you something," Daniel said. "Not because I need the answer to move on, but because I'm curious. Did you ever love me? Even a little bit?" Thomas's face crumpled, tears spilling down his cheeks. "Every day," he whispered. "Every single day I loved you so much it terrified me. But I didn't know how to show it, except through trying to toughen you up, trying to prepare you for a cruel world. My father never told me he loved me, never showed affection, and I turned out fine, or so I told myself. I thought that was how you raised a son to be strong. You didn't turn out fine, Daniel said gently. You turned out damaged and lonely and unable to connect with the one person who should have mattered most to you. And you passed that damage down to me. That's not strength, that's just pain repeating itself. I know that now, Thomas said. Too late, but I know it. You broke the cycle, Daniel. You became someone better than me despite everything I did to stop you. That takes more courage than I ever had. They sat in silence for a long moment, and Daniel felt the weight of 32 years of complicated history settling into something he could finally carry without it crushing him. I'm going to go now, he said, standing. I'll come back in a few days once I've found you a place. And after that, I don't know. Maybe I'll visit occasionally, or maybe I won't. I need to figure out what's healthy for me. I understand, Thomas said. And Daniel, thank you for forgiving me, for making sure I'll be cared for being a better man than I taught you to be. Daniel left the room and found Mia waiting exactly where he'd left her. She searched his face, then opened her arms, and he walked into her embrace, feeling grounded and supported in a way that still felt miraculous. Over the next 2 days, they visited nursing facilities together. Mia had insisted on coming, saying she knew what to look for in terms of quality care, and Daniel was grateful for her expertise. They found a place that felt right, clean, well-staffed, with a garden courtyard and activities that might give his father some quality of life in whatever time remained to him. The administrative work took hours, paperwork and insurance forms and medical histories that Daniel struggled to provide because he'd spent so many years disconnected from his father's life. But Mia stayed with him through all of it, occasionally squeezing his hand or bringing him coffee, her presence a constant reminder that he wasn't alone in this. When it was finally done, when Thomas was settled in his new room with assurances from the staff that they'd take good care of him, Daniel and Mia drove back to the city in comfortable silence. The sun was setting as they approached their neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost absurdly beautiful. I did it, Daniel said quietly as Mia pulled into a parking space near their building. I handled it without falling apart. I set boundaries and stuck to them. I made sure he'd be cared for without sacrificing myself in the process. You did, Mia agreed, turning off the engine. You should be proud of yourself. A week ago, you would have taken on everything, regardless of the cost to your own well-being. The fact that you can recognize your limits and honor them, that's huge growth. They climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor together, and when they reached their doors, Daniel paused. Can I ask you something? Always, Mia said. What happens now? With us. We've been in crisis mode since we started this. We haven't had a chance to just be together without hospitals or dying fathers or emotional revelations. What does normal look like for us? Mia smiled, stepping closer until they were nearly touching. I think normal looks like this. Coming home together, having dinner, watching terrible television, talking about our days, learning each other's rhythms and preferences and pet peeves. It's not dramatic or intense. It's just 2 people choosing to build a life together, day by ordinary day. I want that, Daniel said. I want boring and normal and predictable in the best possible way. I want to know what it's like to have someone to come home to share meals with, to fall asleep beside. Then let's start tonight, Mia said. Let's have a completely normal evening. No heavy conversations about the past, no crisis to manage. Just us, being together, seeing what that feels like. They ordered pizza and ate it sitting on Mia's floor, backs against the couch, while a movie played on her television. They talked about nothing important, favorite foods, embarrassing moments from middle school, the peculiar characters who populated their respective workplaces. Mia taught Daniel a card game her grandmother had taught her, and they played several rounds, laughing when Daniel's competitive streak emerged, and he got genuinely invested in winning. You're adorable when you're focused, Mia said, watching him study his cards with intense concentration. Your forehead gets all scrunched up and you bite your lower lip. Daniel looked up, self-conscious. I do not. You absolutely do. It's one of my favorite things about you, how fully you commit to everything, even stupid card games. She set down her cards, reaching over to smooth the crease between his eyebrows. You don't do anything halfway. When you decide to let someone in,
You really let them in.
When you commit to something, you're all in. Is that good or bad? Daniel asked. It's wonderful, Mia said firmly. It means when you tell me you want to build something with me, I know you mean it. You're not casual or halfway present. You're here, completely, choosing me every day. Later, as they cleaned up the remnants of pizza and cards, Daniel found himself watching Mia move around her kitchen, and the domesticity of the moment struck him with unexpected force. This was what he'd been missing all his life. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, but the simple comfort of sharing space with someone who made the ordinary feel extraordinary. "What are you thinking?" Mia asked, catching him staring. "I'm thinking I could watch you organize your kitchen for hours and be perfectly content," Daniel admitted. "I'm thinking I spent 32 years believing happiness was something other people got to experience, and now I'm standing in your apartment feeling happier than I knew was possible, and it's overwhelming and terrifying and absolutely perfect." Mia crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and looking up at him with an expression so tender it made his chest ache. "You're allowed to be happy, Daniel. You're allowed to have good things. You're allowed to believe that this, us, is real and lasting, and not something that's going to be taken away the moment you start to trust it." "I'm trying to believe that," Daniel said. "Every day I'm trying." "That's all I ask," Mia replied. "Just keep trying, keep showing up, keep choosing this even when it's scary." As the evening stretched into night, they migrated to the couch, and Daniel found himself talking about things he'd never shared with anyone, childhood dreams he'd abandoned, the piano he'd loved to play before his father had called it frivolous, the secret belief he'd harbored that maybe, someday, he could be someone who mattered beyond his utility to others. "You matter," Mia said fiercely, "not because you're useful or competent or good at fixing things. You matter because you exist, because you're kind and thoughtful and brave in ways you don't even recognize, because you make me want to be braver too." "How do I make you brave?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious. "By being vulnerable with me," Mia said, "by showing me that it's okay to admit when you're scared or hurting or uncertain. I've spent my whole adult life trying to be the strong one, the caretaker, the person everyone can rely on. But watching you learn to accept help, to admit you can't do everything alone, it's teaching me that I don't have to be invincible either." The conversation drifted into comfortable silence, and eventually Daniel realized he was falling asleep on Mia's couch, her fingers playing gently with his hair. "I should go," he murmured, not moving. "Or you could stay," Mia suggested. "We could go to bed together, actually sleep like we did before. We could wake up tomorrow and have coffee and start figuring out what our normal routine looks like." Daniel opened his eyes, looking at her. "I'd like that. I'd like to wake up next to you and not have it be because of a crisis. I'd like to learn what ordinary mornings feel like when you're not alone." They moved to Mia's bedroom, and the routine of getting ready for sleep together felt both intimate and comfortable. Daniel borrowed clothes again, and they brushed their teeth side by side at her bathroom sink, catching each other's eyes in the mirror and smiling at the simple domesticity of it all. In bed, Mia curled against Daniel's side, her head on his chest, and he held her close, breathing in the lavender scent of her shampoo. "Can I tell you something?" she said into the darkness. "Anything," Daniel replied. "I'm falling in love with you," Mia said quietly. "I know it's early, and I know we're still figuring things out, but I need you to know this isn't casual for me. This isn't just about companionship or ending loneliness. I'm falling in love with who you are, with your kindness and your courage, and the way you're learning to believe you deserve good things." Daniel's breath caught, emotions swelling in his chest so intensely he could barely speak. "I'm falling in love with you too," he managed. "I have been since that first day with the bookshelf, but I'm only now letting myself acknowledge it. You make me want to be better, braver, more honest. You make me believe I could be someone worth loving." "You already are," Mia said, pressing a kiss over his heart. "You always were. I'm just helping you see it." They lay together in the darkness, and Daniel felt something fundamental settle inside him. Not the end of his struggles or the resolution of all his wounds, but the beginning of healing. The recognition that he didn't have to be perfect or fixed or completely whole to be worthy of love. That he could be in process, still learning, still growing, and that could be enough. Morning came gently,
sunlight filtering through curtains and illuminating the room in soft gold. Daniel woke to find Mia already awake, watching him with a soft smile. "Good morning," she said. "How did you sleep?" "Like I was safe," Daniel replied.
Like I didn't have to keep one eye open watching for danger. Like I could actually rest. They had coffee in Mia's kitchen, talking about their plans for the day. Mia had a shift at the hospital, and Daniel needed to return to work, to start integrating back into his normal routine. But normal felt different now. It felt like something to look forward to rather than just endure. "What are you doing this weekend?" Mia asked as they prepared to leave for their respective jobs. "Nothing planned," Daniel said. "Why?" "Because I want to take you somewhere," Mia replied. "I want to show you one of my favorite places. It's about an hour outside the city, a little park with hiking trails and a lake. I go there sometimes when I need to clear my head. I want to share it with you." "I'd like that," Daniel said, meaning it. "I'd like to see the places that matter to you, to understand what your world looks like." They parted in the hallway, heading to their separate apartments to get ready for work. But before Daniel could unlock his door, Mia called his name. He turned to find her standing in her doorway, looking suddenly uncertain. "What is it?" he asked. I needed to make sure this is all real, that you're not going to wake up tomorrow and decide this was all a mistake. That you're really here, really choosing this." Vulnerability shone in her eyes, and Daniel realized with a jolt that she was scared too, that his fear of abandonment was matched by her fear of investing in someone who might leave. He crossed the hallway, pulling her into his arms. "I'm here," he said firmly. "I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Every day, for as long as you'll have me, I'm choosing us." Mia relaxed against him, and they stood in their hallway, the space that had contained so much longing and missed connection, finally, completely together. Work felt surreal. Daniel sat at his desk, trying to focus on spreadsheets that had consumed his attention just a week ago. But everything felt different now. Sarah Chen noticed immediately, stopping by his cubicle with raised eyebrows. "Okay, you have to tell me what happened," she said. "You look like a completely different person. You're actually smiling. I've worked next to you for 2 years, and I don't think I've ever seen you smile." Daniel felt heat creep up his neck, but he also felt something else, the desire to share his happiness rather than hide it. "I met someone," he said. "Or actually, I finally worked up the courage to be with someone I'd been admiring from a distance for years." Sarah's face lit up with genuine delight. "That's amazing. Tell me everything. How did it happen?" So Daniel found himself telling an abbreviated version of the story. The blind date, Mia walking into the cafe, the confrontation and confession, and the days since. Sarah listened with rapt attention, and when he finished, she was actually wiping her eyes. "That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard," she said. "And Daniel, I'm really happy for you. You deserve this. You've always been so kind to everyone in this office, always willing to help, but you've seemed so lonely. I'm glad you found someone who sees you." The words settled warm in Daniel's chest. The recognition that his transformation was visible to others, that happiness looked different on him than the careful neutrality he'd maintained for years. Marcus called during lunch, wanting an update. Daniel shared everything: the conversation with his father, the nursing facility placement, the deepening relationship with Mia, the strange sensation of being genuinely happy for the first time in his memory. "I'm proud of you, brother," Marcus said. "You did the hard work. You faced your past, you set healthy boundaries, you let someone in. That takes more courage than most people will ever understand." "I couldn't have done it without you," Daniel said, honestly. "Without you pushing me to go on that blind date, without your friendship over the years showing me that connection was possible. You've been teaching me how to be open without even realizing it." "That's what friends do," Marcus replied. "We hold each other accountable. We push each other to grow. We refuse to let each other settle for less than we deserve." The weekend arrived, and Mia drove them to her favorite park, a hidden gem tucked into rolling hills that felt a world away from the city, despite being less than an hour's drive. They hiked together, Mia pointing out her favorite spots, and Daniel found himself actually present in the moment, rather than lost in anxiety about past or future. At the lake, they sat on a weathered dock, feet dangling over the water, and Mia told him about the first time she'd come here, right after her bad breakup, feeling broken and uncertain about whether she could trust anyone again. "I sat right here and made myself a promise," she said, "that I wouldn't settle for someone who made me feel small, that I'd wait for someone who saw my value and celebrated it rather than feeling threatened by it. I thought I might wait forever." "And instead you waited 3 years, Daniel said, "while I lived across the hall being too afraid to knock on your door." "The timing wasn't right until it was," Mia said philosophically. "If you'd knocked on my door a year ago, you wouldn't have been ready. You needed to hit rock bottom first. You needed to try to move on so you could realize you didn't want to. Sometimes the long way around is actually the shortest path to where you're supposed to be." As the sun began to set, painting the lake in impossible colors, Daniel felt a peace he'd never experienced. He'd spent his entire life running from connection, convinced that isolation was safety. But sitting here with Mia, their shoulders touching, sharing comfortable silence punctuated by easy conversation, he understood what he'd been missing. "I love you," he said, the words emerging with surprising ease. "I'm completely, terrifyingly in love with you, and I needed you to know that." Mia turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you too. So much it scares me. But I'm learning that being scared doesn't mean something's wrong. It just means something matters enough to be frightening." They kissed as the sun set behind them, and Daniel thought about how far he'd traveled in just 1 week. From lonely accountant dreading a blind date to man in love, learning to believe he deserved happiness. From someone defined by his wounds to someone learning to heal. The journey back to the city felt different than the drive out. They talked about the future, carefully, without pressure, but with genuine hope. About maybe combining their apartments eventually, about trips they could take, about the ordinary life they could build together. Back at their building, Mrs. Patterson intercepted them on the stairs, her eyes twinkling with barely contained excitement. "I knew it," she said triumphantly. "I've been telling everyone who'd listen that you two would figure it out eventually. Took you long enough." "We're a bit slow," Mia said, smiling, "but we got there in the end." "That's all that matters," Mrs. Patterson said. "Now, I expect a wedding invitation when the time comes. I've been waiting years to see you two together properly." In the hallway between their doors, Daniel and Mia stood facing each other, reluctant to part, even though they'd spent the entire day together. "Thank you," Daniel said, "for today, for showing me your favorite place, for sharing yourself with me." "Thank you for being open to it," Mia replied, "for learning to accept love instead of just pushing it away, for being brave enough to build this with me." "What happens now?" Daniel asked, echoing the question from days before. "Not with us. I know what happens with us. We keep choosing each other. But with my father, with my past, with all the wounds I'm still carrying, how do I move forward while still holding all of that?" Mia considered the question carefully. "I think you do exactly what you've been doing. You acknowledge the pain without letting it define you. You set boundaries that protect your healing. You let people who love you help carry the weight when it gets too heavy. You forgive yourself for not being perfect at any of it." She touched his face gently. "Healing isn't linear, Daniel. There will be days when you feel like you've regressed, when old fears come back, when you doubt everything. And on those days, you remember that growth is messy and imperfect, and that's okay. You remember that you're not alone anymore." Daniel pulled her close, holding her tightly, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing anchor him to this moment, this truth, this new reality he was learning to inhabit. "I spent so long believing I was unlovable," he whispered. "It's hard to trust that you really see me and want to stay." "Then I'll keep showing you," Mia said simply. "Every day, in every small way I can think of, I'll keep showing you that you're worth staying for. Eventually, you'll believe it without needing constant reassurance. But until then, I'll be patient." They stood in their hallway for a long time, holding each other, letting the magnitude of everything that had changed in one short week settle into something they could carry forward. Finally, Mia pulled back with a smile. "Come on," she said, unlocking her door. "Let's make dinner together. Let's practice being domestic and normal and boring in the best possible way." And so they did. They made a meal that was mediocre at best, laughing at their shared lack of culinary skill. They ate sitting on her floor because it had become their spot, the place where they'd shared so many important conversations. They cleaned up together, moving around each other with increasing comfort, learning the rhythm of shared space. As night fell, Daniel realized he didn't want to go back to his own apartment, didn't want to sleep alone when he could sleep beside Mia. And when he said as much, she simply smiled and said, "Then don't. Stay. Let's keep figuring this out together." So he did. He stayed, and they fell asleep tangled together. And when morning came, Daniel woke to find Mia watching him with soft eyes and a gentle smile. And he knew with absolute certainty that this was what home felt like. Not a place, but a person. Not isolation masquerading as safety, but connection brave enough to be vulnerable. In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into a rhythm. Daniel kept his apartment but spent most nights at Mia's. They had dinner together more often than not, learning each other's preferences and pet peeves and the thousand small details that make up a shared life. Daniel started therapy again, this time with a counselor who specialized in childhood trauma, and slowly began unpacking wounds he'd carried for decades. There were hard days. Days when Daniel's old fears surfaced and he tried to push Mia away, convinced she'd be better off without him. Days when Mia's own abandonment issues made her clingy and insecure, needing reassurance Daniel was still learning how to give. But they talked through it. They were honest about their struggles. They chose each other even when it was difficult. Marcus became a regular presence in their lives, joining them for dinners and game nights, witnessing their relationship with the pride of someone who'd helped make it possible. Sarah from work became an unexpected friend, having coffee with Daniel and occasionally double dating with him and Mia. Thomas Brooks survived his stroke and lived in his nursing facility with the kind of care Daniel had ensured but couldn't personally provide. Daniel visited once a month, maintaining boundaries that protected his own healing while still honoring his father's humanity. The visits were never easy, but they were honest. Thomas continued apologizing, and Daniel continued choosing forgiveness, not because it was deserved, but because he refused to be poisoned by bitterness. 6 months after that fateful Tuesday night in the cafe, Daniel stood in Mia's apartment, their apartment now, officially, after he'd finally given up his lease and combined their lives fully. He was unpacking the last box of his belongings, and Mia was watching him with amusement. "You know what's funny?" she said. "You lived 3 feet away for 3 years, and we probably could have been doing this the entire time if we'd just been brave enough to knock on each other's doors." "I don't know," Daniel said thoughtfully. "I think we both needed to be ready. You needed to heal from your ex. I needed to hit rock bottom and start climbing back up. The timing was exactly what it needed to be." "Maybe," Mia agreed, "but I'm still glad we figured it out when we did. I'm glad you went on that blind date. I'm glad I walked into that cafe. I'm glad I was brave enough to ask why you didn't choose me. Trust." Daniel crossed to where she stood, pulling her into his arms. "I'm glad you did too. I'm glad you saw something in me worth fighting for. I'm glad you were patient while I learned to believe I deserved you." "You deserve everything," Mia said firmly. "You deserve happiness and peace and love and all the ordinary, beautiful moments we're building together. Don't ever forget that." "I won't," Daniel promised. "You won't let me." They finished unpacking together, and as Daniel placed the last of his books on what was now their shared bookshelf, he thought about how much had changed. He'd gone from invisible to seen, from isolated to connected, from surviving to actually living. The journey wasn't over, healing never was, but he was no longer walking it alone. That night, lying in bed with Mia curled against his side, Daniel thought about the man he'd been just months ago. The one who'd sat in an office dreading a blind date, convinced he was destined for permanent loneliness. He thought about how close he'd come to never experiencing this, never knowing what it felt like to be loved completely and honestly. "Thank you," he whispered into Mia's hair. "For what?" she murmured sleepily. "For walking into that cafe, for being brave when I couldn't be. For teaching me that love doesn't require perfection, just honesty and effort and the willingness to keep showing up." Mia pressed a kiss to his chest. "Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me with your heart, for choosing to heal instead of just survive." They fell asleep holding each other, and for the first time in 32 years, Daniel Brooks felt genuinely, completely, impossibly happy. Not because everything was perfect or all his wounds were healed, but because he'd finally learned the most important lesson of all, That courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was loving anyway. It was knocking on the door anyway. It was believing you deserved happiness anyway. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the person you'd been searching for had been right across the hall all along, just waiting for you to be brave enough to see them, just waiting for you to come home.